Prologue, cast by Arte Studio. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening.
Do you think humans can grow?
He spoke, almost as if praying.
On the surface, it may have seemed like an arrogant thought that an ordinary person can never become more than that. While most may have derived that sort of implication from those words, in this case they were said with an honest sincerity, as if revealing a cherished, heartfelt wish. Considering the stage on which they were offered, that may have been appropriate.
In that old, desolate church, with a black-stained visage of Mother Mary looking down on us. In reality, it wasn't something so grand as could be called a statue of Mary, but at the very least, the local people had considered it as such. And so he asked,
By repeated study, I became good at calculations. I memorized history. Of course, in that respect, growth is certainly possible. Even among my students, just by giving some trivial advice, plenty of them have risen to remarkable heights. But if we're talking about a person's true essence, can that really be considered growth?
The true target of his question cut straight to the heart of the matter, the beginning of his own life. Yes, in a sense, maybe it was impossible. After all, considering everyone around me, I couldn't point to one person who had. Within my own group, I was special from the start, always treated as special and separate. Thanks to that, the only person I could really talk to was the personality given to a particular mystic code. In those unnecessarily spacious church grounds, I was always just cowering in fear. With the expectations of everyone around me on my shoulders, all I could do was try to avoid their gazes without accomplishing anything. Why was it that this world had no color? That was always what I had thought.
No, I did understand that the problem wasn't with the world. Because of my own eyes being clouded over, I was trapped within a world of black and white, ashen, gloomy,
Vague and ambiguous. Gray. No matter how far I ran, I understood that that was the nature of my existence. Compared to that, how much more sincere were those who were already buried deep in the ground, free from lies, released from vanity and ambition, truly free in every respect. To say the difference between us was like heaven and earth didn't do the comparison justice.
When that person had finally shown up, I had already given up. I was already tired of giving up, thoroughly exhausted by my constant cowering.
Just like always. I remember him smoking on a cigar. His jet-black suit was lit from behind by the light of a stained glass window. Though the face, hidden in that shadow, was undoubtedly that of an adult, I felt like somewhere in that hard expression I could still see a child.
But I raised my voice.
Aren't you the most successful person in the clock tower? Considering who I was at the time, it was a rare thing for me to say. Words that undeniably stepped into someone else's situation. But because it was him, I felt the need to ask. Even if it meant bending my way of doing things a little, I wanted to know about him.
Reluctantly, he answered.
Right. I've held this position for a little more than 9 years now.
His voice was full of regret, as if the achievement belonged to someone else.
He opened his hands and clasped the fingers of his black gloves together.
I've learned to use magecraft better than before. I've learned the boring skills of scheming and negotiating. Even my scholarship of magecraft has become somewhat considerable. But where is the meaning in that?
A time probably spent entirely as a desperate, frenzied climb. Even I could sympathize with that situation.
No doubt it was like having your flesh ground up and your bones crushed to pieces every day. I wasn't very smart, and I didn't know much about the clock tower he had come from, but I could well imagine the intense study and harsh discipline that must have been required to reach where he was now. But now, he was denying all of that.
Long ago, I participated in a battle in the Far East.
Ignoring me, who was unable to keep up with the sudden change in topics, he continued.
In that battle were a number of heroic spirits and their masters. Of course the heroic spirits too, but even the masters were all elites and professional killers that I could never compare to even now. If you ask how a me that was even less experienced than I am now managed to get through that battle alive, I'd have no answer to give you than luck. Because of my complete lack of ability, I avoided everyone else's attention. Yes, if it was me now, I would probably be marked and killed right away.
Probably, he said, but with a weight in his voice that spoke of the hundreds. The thousands of times he must have replayed those battles differently in his head. And in those different simulations, how many times had he seen himself die? In the chilly air of the church, he spoke again.
In that case, does that mean the me of the past was actually better than I am now?
As you said, I think that's a matter of luck. Mumbling, I shared my own thoughts. Those words demanded an objection. Or so I thought. But
Yes, that's exactly right. But can someone who was just carried along by luck and coincidence really be thought to have grown?
once again he returned to the original question. It wasn't that he had led us back to where we started, but more that we had never left. It wasn't that he was particularly eloquent, just that his simple frankness made him drive that one question ever forward. That was just the way he did things. His manner was so serious it made one want to give a bitter smile. Not that I was sure anyone else could take what he was saying seriously.
The course we take when life comes to a crossroads is always determined by the smallest coincidences, the tiniest twists of fate. If that's the case, can we really say that humans grow? Even as a child, anyone can get caught up in the desire to just quietly follow someone greater than they are. Someone who was just born great, born a king. Isn't that the case?
He spoke as if he had already accepted that that was the way of the world, yet as if he was chastising someone for taking it as fact. Who could that have been? As if glaring back down at hell itself, he continued his angry rant.
I haven't grown at all. Nothing has changed since that time. I haven't gotten any closer to becoming the person I wanted to be.
Those words came out thick with blood. The wounds on his soul were completely raw, and even now bright red was flowing from them. Or rather, it was like he was digging his nails into the wounds himself, demanding that they stay open. As if the throbbing pain in his heart was a reminder of the impulse that had first set him on his path.
I want to change.
He was probably close to 30 years old. At that age, someone from the same line of work would no doubt look at his success and question, why on earth would you want to change? But that desire was not some desire for a bright new future. It was nothing close to the everlasting ambition of a genius that had already reached the stars. Disgusting. So I thought. It was a feeling I was quite familiar with, like a build-up of mud under your skin. At that time, I understood. The people of my hometown always told me that I should change, that I should nurture the rare nature I possessed. That refusing to contribute when you had the ability was in itself a sin that could not easily be forgiven. Alternatively, like the books that reached even to our rural part of the country, you should accept yourself exactly as you are. Irresponsible words telling you to accept even the pathetic and absurd parts of yourself, which even I found hard to swallow. But he wasn't like either of those. Without seeing the creases carved between his eyebrows or the thin line his mouth was drawn into, his message was still clear. A rejection of that simple, easy kind of change. A rejection of that slothful, lazy refusal to change.
Even so, no, because of that, I want your help.
He spoke.
This is entirely my selfishness. I have no guarantee I can provide you with a future or compensation that would satisfy you. Rather, it's more likely I'll just put you in danger. And I'm not so arrogant as to say that I'd be able to protect you. It's quite likely you could end up risking everything to protect me, and I'd be the only one who walks away.
One piece at a time, he laid out the honest truth. I thought he had no need to lay out all the negative points like this, but that was just who he was. But thanks to that honesty, I was able to get a glimpse of another truth. Just as his words ran thick with blood, just as his soul was scarred deep with wounds, this person was even now still suffering. His past choices, his current way of being, his future possibilities, all of these were agony to him, as if he still held the spear puncturing his heart. That's why, rather than logic, it was those words that soaked through me.
Even so, I want you to come with me.
In that case, it would be fine. It made me think, if you will worry with me, if you will suffer with me, if you will get hurt with me. If it's this man, then his guidance would be better than the words of any sage. That's what I thought. Can I ask you to promise me one thing? I finally spoke. Please keep hating my face. Even now, I can still remember his flustered expression. He must be a good person, I thought. So much so that he still felt the shame of his first terrified reaction upon seeing my face. But even so, after a pause of a few seconds, he nodded heavily.
I promise!
So, said Lord El-Melloi II, my master. Chapter 1, Part Un. Has anything changed since then? At the sudden recollection, my eyes narrowed. The reason I had remembered it was nothing special. Just seeing my master hanging his head, lit from behind by the setting sun, I thought it was a similar image. Becoming able to do something that you couldn't do before is not the only way that you can measure growth. And yet, my master continued to pile on new skills and knowledge as if that was all he knew. That's why his life held so much suffering. And yet from that excruciating life, he neither ran nor cowered. Even now, I still didn't know from where he drew that strength. We were on a hill. From the place we had been observing the twin towers of the sun and moon before, we were now looking at them from the opposite side. The overpowering scent of the densely growing grass was enough to make you choke. Hidden amongst the dirt and grass were a number of rabbit holes, making it not hard to believe that such a place was often the stage for many famous works. Even in my hometown we had a number of books of the adorable Peter Rabbit and his family. From this angle, the blood-like color of the setting sun over the mist and grasses gave the impression the world had been replaced by some sort of far-off fantasy. My master stood silently, scribbling in his notebook.
Now, shall we start preparing for the coming battle?
After such an impressive declaration, he had just gone back to his observations. That being said, perhaps because of some sort of development caused by the piece of paper Svin had brought for him, he occasionally would pop his head up from his notebook to confirm details of the case with Rains.
The one who asked for asylum at the start was really the Princess of Gold, right?
Course, esteemed brother. There's no way you can mistake her for someone else.
And the next morning, you found the body in her room. The mystic lock was still set.
Correct.
In this way, he was slowly getting things in order. After the Iselma social assembly, the Princess of Gold had approached Rhines hoping to seek asylum with the El-Melloi family and the aristocratic faction of the clock tower. After that, when she went to meet her the next morning, Rhines was the first to find the princess torn apart, and soon became the main suspect. After that, Kalina was found dead by Trimmal, who had blood on her hands, prompting Iselma to take the mystic code hostage. My master wrote all this down in his book with a fountain pen stylized in the manner of a griffin. It was a treasure left behind by the head of the El-Melloi of 2 generations ago, so for my master to take it after rejecting virtually all of the El-Melloi estate meant it must have been something of significant interest to him. The smell of ink mixing faintly with the air was something I liked as well. Just like the smell of his cigars, it was something that always seemed to cling to him. For some reason, whenever I recognized that scent, I could always calm down. I didn't know the reason why. Perhaps my master had laced the smells with some sort of magecraft to help relax the mind, but I didn't feel the need to ask. Alongside that came a certain rambunctious voice.
That's why I'm saying the culprit must be a Baritsu user. It's really invincible. You can use it to survive when you fall off a cliff, or even to make a person explode. Turning invisible or passing through walls would be a piece of cake.
What kind of ridiculous magecraft are you on about now? First of all, is that even magecraft, or just a martial art?
Baritsu was Baritsu. Sherlock Holmes is famous for using it, so the professor must be able to use it too. It's a skill all detectives have.
Flat, are you saying our professor is something as plain as an ordinary detective?
Excited? Hey, real Baritsu uses a cane too. That cane must be the catalyst for some kind of magecraft, so it must be a martial art that was created to be used by magi. The only reason it hasn't spread more is that one family must have kept the secret to themselves.
Though they had the same blonde hair and blue eyes, the impression they gave couldn't be more different. While the former's hysterical declarations painted him as a young, naive boy, the latter had an air of savage beauty about him. Flatiscados and Svinglashgate. Even in the illustrious El-Melloi classroom, these two stood head and shoulders above the rest.
Excited that Buck is a hero. He's a true superstar of London. The same as Jack the Ripper, though I feel a bit bad for his victims.
Don't put our professor in the same group as a serial killer. In the first place, whether it's Sherlock Holmes or Napoleon, our professor isn't someone who can be compared to people who just showed up a bit in novels and history.
Yes, well, Svin wasn't entirely right.
While my master was looked up to as a true hero among the New Ages, the fact of the matter was that these two were the real vanguard, and while most people hoped dearly to just leave them to their own thing, the fear that their interactions could escalate to the point of destroying the classroom itself was the greatest source of unease in the current El-Melloi classroom. That being said, I would do anything to avoid getting close to Svin. If he was going to get that worked up and aggressive whenever he saw me, I couldn't think anything other than that he hated me for some reason. I was used to not being liked by people, but such a vicious rejection was still enough to make me feel a little sad. No doubt, his gaze constantly flickering to me while he talked to Flat was a measure to try and keep me in check.
Hold on. That's not true at all.
Suddenly Rhines, who was sitting beside me, spoke up, sitting with her head resting on her knees. Even so, she seemed to be thoroughly enjoying herself as she looked sideways at me. That small smile at the corner of her lips was as good an indicator as any that she was going to begin teasing me again.
What do you mean?
Well, you're thinking something like Svin must hate me, aren't you?
My breath caught with a sudden jerking motion at being so clearly read. Miss Rhines' mind reading is... Before I could say any more, she put a hand to her mouth to hide her giggling.
I don't need anything like that. Anyone could tell just by looking at your face. To be precise, by looking at the way your eyes move and how you're resting your hands and fingers, you may think of yourself as somewhat uncommunicative, but you're quite talkative in your own way, you know? I'd say about half as much as Ad.
That. After such a shocking evaluation, I found myself at a loss for words.
He. Me, talkative? Everyone knows I'm the quietest, most intellectual, most elegant box around.
To the best of my ability, I ignored the voice coming from around my right hand. Unfortunately, Flat was not willing to do the same, instead turning around to face me.
The Saturday. Show me. Let me talk to him. Let me take him apart.
Hey, don't talk to Gray so flippantly.
As the two drew closer to us, I could feel my shoulders start to tremble.
Quiet down, you guys. Also, Svin, keep at least 5 meters away from Gray unless it's an emergency.
With an exasperated voice, my master spoke, and then...
It seems we have a guest.
So saying, he capped his pen.
Did you discover something?
Just hearing it, I could feel that intoxicating voice cloud my thoughts as it washed over the grass. Cutting through the scent of cigars and the colour of the sunset was the figure of that woman. Her shadow, cast by the setting sun, felt like something completely different coming from her, perhaps the shadow of a god of death.
Princess of Silver.
My master called the name of the veiled woman, and one step behind her, her maid stood quietly waiting.
Regina.
The remaining of the twin maids stood quietly, avoiding our eyes. In her stead, her master spoke.
Frommel, a pleasure to meet you, Lord El-Melloi II. I've heard quite a bit about you.
I can't expect there's much in the way of good rumors about me floating about.
Before my master's bitter smile, the princess lifted her head. It felt like the wind had stopped entirely. It was as if all sound had ceased, as if even the flowers themselves were spellbound by her face. Peering out from within her veil, her appearance was ever so slightly different from her sister's, yet it was of course still unfathomably beautiful.
My sister, did you discover something about the deaths of Kalina and the Princess of Gold?
That voice hit my master head on. Its awesome beauty pierced right through to my core.
I would like to express my deepest condolences for your loss.
He replied with a polite bow. His voice had an unmistakable sincerity to it. Maybe because he was someone who knew what it meant to lose someone. What exactly had he lost in that battle so long ago? Even if one were to say he had gained a lot since then, would that be enough to even the scales?
However, that is why I feel it all the more important to discover the true culprit.
You believe your sister is innocent, then?
Yes.
His reply was instant. For a moment, even I was stunned. Just a little, the Princess of Silver's manner seemed to soften.
You have a good brother, don't you?
Yes, I certainly do.
Rhines replied calmly, a nod indicating the deeper meaning behind that for her. When Rhines was like this, I sometimes felt like she would be better off acting and expressing herself more clearly. Maybe. Following that, Ryan spoke again.
May I ask what happened with Trimmal?
If you mean volumen hydrogrim, then my father has carefully stored it away somewhere.
Good. I'll leave her in your care then.
Rhines nodded sagely. Even if it was her, there was no way she was as relaxed as she was putting on. Trimmal was one of the most important mystic codes of the El-Melloi family, so there was no way she didn't feel like she was backed into a corner. As if under the threat of an invisible knife, a strange nervousness hung on the world. If magecraft was something built up out of will, then that may have been another kind of magecraft in itself, an ancient curse known by all humanity, independent of any sort of magical foundation or ritual. Words and will were both invisible, and therein lay their mystery. Such was the driving force of many legends among those with no connection to magecraft. Suddenly, my master moved.
By the way, I believe this belonged to your sister.
Saying that, he pulled an object from his pocket and showed it to Regina. A necklace in which was set a stone engraved with a whorl. Regina's eyes widened slightly as she saw the blood-stained accessory.
Thank you. Yes, it was my sister's.
It looks Celtic to me.
Yes, when she was born, our grandmother...
As if wrapped up in nostalgia, the maid seemed to get lost within her own memory. Suddenly I was assaulted by a piercing chill across my entire body. Wrapping my arms around myself, I called out as if fevered. Yeah,
Yes, I felt it too, though with his dull senses he probably only felt slightly uneasy.
With one eye shut, Rainey's interjected. Were her mystic eyes reacting as well?
Hey, watch what you're saying.
I'd appreciate it if you didn't get all up in arms about basic facts. More importantly, Miss Silver Princess, would this happen to be related to Iselma's boundary field?
Fundamentally speaking, a boundary field was something that divided the inside from the outside. If hiding something was the objective, then the highest levels of boundary fields were ones that were themselves impossible to discern. After all, no matter how powerful a magi was, they couldn't dismantle a boundary field they didn't know existed. As such, it was kind of a given that they would be difficult to detect. However, there was one other purpose for boundary fields, in short, for defense, a barrier to protect those inside from any sort of external force. A boundary field that reacted to the presence of enemy magic was one such example. A common type were those that would signal the presence of an enemy magus once they had stepped into the defender's territory. Of course, something like a boundary field that revealed a person's thoughts didn't really exist. If they did, something like a murder investigation would be entirely unnecessary. In short, this was a case of magecraft that wasn't bothering to hide itself from its opponent.
Please excuse me.
With a succinct word of farewell, the Princess of Silver spun around and took her leave.
Professor!
Flat? I think probably over there.
Flat pointed down the hill towards the nearby forest.
Observant looks like more than 10 people. Or 20, 30.
While Flat's ability in most fields of magecraft were already fairly advanced, when it came to magical detection he was truly peerless. So while most of what he said was often dismissed out of hand as being silly or absurd, in this one area even my master put a heavy weight on his words.
If there's that many, someone is attacking Iselma now, of all times?
Rain's reply was clearly colored with surprise. There was no way it could be a coincidence.
While still dealing with the serial murder investigation, an army of magi were attacking. If this were a coincidence, then something like magecraft would be completely unnecessary. Magecraft was at its core a method of deceiving the world in order to recreate supernatural phenomena, but if that kind of negative miracle were possible, then magecraft had long ago taken control of the world.
Of course, there's no way it could be a coincidence. So then, it's the people you were investigating.
But, Professor, if that's the case, then
Sven's words cut off abruptly. From the beginning, Iselma thought of us as enemies. Would this be a situation we could work to our advantage? Or would we just get crushed along with everyone else? What would be the best play for us in this kind of chaos? A problem of this magnitude, while our ability to think was already wearing thin, suddenly, the sun darkened.
Clouds, dark storm clouds, were racing across the sky from the east, throwing a shadow over the entire Iselma estate. As we watched uneasily, The clouds spread above us with a clearly unnatural speed.
Master. Instinctively, I leapt towards my master and grabbed him tight.
At the same time, a powerful impact struck my whole body from behind. I could only wonder at how much magical energy had to be invested in that attack, for it to shake the ground under us to such a degree. While the lightning itself had flowed mostly into the ground, the aftermath was enough to throw everyone around it into shock.
Gray.
Gray?
I'm okay. In response to Svin's alarmed shout and my master's quiet inquiry, I gave a small nod. Even in this situation, Svin was keeping to my master's instructions to stay at least 5 meters away from me. His desperate, helpless meandering outside that space was almost amusing to watch.
That lightning was...
Their way of a polite greeting, it seems.
My master whispered softly. Surrounded by the burnt smell left by the lightning, my master clicked his tongue as he looked up at the sky.
Weather-based magecraft aiming for an attack at sunset. Doing things the old-fashioned way, I see. The objective was to strip Iselma of the protection offered by the land, was it?
By wounding the land itself, the natural flow of magical energy would be disrupted. If that land were being managed by a magus, it was natural to expect the land itself would be enchanted with protective measures, and as such it was equally natural for an attacker to begin by attempting to neutralize that advantage. While the attacker's methods were certainly the opposite of subtle, there was still intelligence in them. Without delay, I could feel magical energy begin to move in one of Iselma's towers in response. The fact that the response came from the Tower of the Moon was as good as definitive proof that it housed Iselma's workshop. While the form of the magecraft that had been set in motion there was still a mystery, the idea that it would treat us kindly was far-fetched, to say the least.
Master.
First things first, we need to withdraw to avoid taking losses of our own.
While withdrawing made it sound nice, really what he meant was we needed to hide, so we didn't get caught in the crossfire. Of course it was obvious that whether we considered the attacker or the defender, neither was a magus my master's skills in magecraft could hope to equal.
Let's run as fast as we can, basically.
Of course we're running. I'd rather just cover my head and get out, and never have to set eyes on this place again. If only a certain someone hadn't given them collateral.
To think my brother would level such harsh words against me. My whole body is about to be set to trembling at the disgrace. Though if that's the kind of thing you're into, I think I can work on it a bit.
As if anyone would be interested in seeing that in their sister. Now let's hurry up and find somewhere safe to hide until this blows over.
The bitterness was evident in my master's voice as he spun to leave.
Or...
He stopped, taking back his previous words.
Perhaps it's already too late for that.
Huh? At first I was confused, but the meaning behind my master's increasingly bitter voice soon became clear. Flat. Turning, I blurted out his name without thinking. Flat was, of course, nowhere to be seen. Even if we were stunned in the aftermath of the lightning, there was no way my master reigns, and I would all fail to see him leaving unless he was intentionally trying to sneak away. Well, such sneaking was his specialty as a magus, anyways.
I'm going after him.
Wait, Svin!
Without waiting to let anyone stop him, Spin immediately broke off running, and at a speed that would be hard for me to match even if I had ad support too. Perhaps following his scent, he ran off in a straight line to the forest nearby, despite having no apparent clues as to where Flat went.
This is exactly why I told you two not to come here.
Holding a hand to his stomach, my master's perpetual frown deepened as he gave a long sigh.
Bad.
A tram gazed down at the crater left by his own magecraft with a cruel smile. From a plateau nearby, though he was still a few kilometers away from the site, he was looking down on Iselma's territory using a pair of antique opera glasses that had been left in the hotel lobby. Holding tight the scantily clad woman sitting near him, he whispered softly.
What do you think? Doesn't it feel like calling down fire to burn away the castle of your rival in love?
Patterning himself after the deeds of an ancient heroic spirit known as Medea in her massacre. He boasted about his work. Of course his actions could hardly be called comparable. For someone like her, who had existed before the Common Era in an age where mankind was much closer to magecraft, a simple one-count spell would have been sufficient to replicate the effect of a modern bomber aircraft. If a modern magus dedicated their life to study and layered up ritual after ritual, it was still questionable whether they could reach the same level. But, in that respect, that was what made this particular spell impressive. While magecraft that put the weather to work was certainly of an enormous scale, it wasn't particularly rare. On the contrary, it would be harder to find a single place didn't have its own long history of rain-making rituals. However, if one looked at modern magi, examples of success were few and far between, especially when one considered how much the current state of magecraft had declined. While it was true that Tram's success had hinged on the lakeside country of his target being the perfect environment for generating storm clouds, they were still results worthy of praise. For this purpose, dozens of magi connected to his family had gathered to participate in the ritual, on the border between night and day, where many kinds of defensive magecraft grew weak. He had drove forward the vanguard of his assault.
Now, plunder! Take everything! Let's start this raid with efficiency.
The young man laughed, his voice clear and bright. That was how Tram's family, how the Galliasta family had risen to prominence. If you want it, then take it. If there's a blade in your hand, then swing. Such was the teaching Atram was given. In order to determine the next head of the family, his father had pit him and his brothers against each other in a number of trials meant to curry political power. Atram was the one who dealt with those trials most efficiently. And so, while earning a title in the clock tower, Atram surpassed his father, who had refused to step into the world of magi and joyfully adopted it as his own. Seeing magecraft that was considered old and outdated, he instead saw profit and potential. Even the agonizing physical pain of accepting his family's magic crest was pure pleasure for him. For that pain was a symbol of the power, of the value he had won.
Now,
Standing, he raised his glass of wine.
vengeful, it's time to make you regret the sin of robbing me of my rightful spoils.
Of course, the custodian of the land was aware of the attack that had taken place in the Tower of the Moon.
A water basin. In the center of the room, an old porcelain basin was filled with water drawn from the land itself. The ripples in that water reflected the strength and scope of the enemy magecraft. While there were any number of similar magecrafts, this level of precision was only possible within one's own territory. On top of that, the usage of these kinds of mystic codes was a specialty of the faculty of creation, value.
A declaration of war, is it?
The Magus muttered in a hate-filled voice. Looking down at the water filling the basin, he bit down hard on the mouth of his pipe. The moment Lord Byron, the head of the Iselma family, had felt something was wrong, he immediately activated the basin and took stock of the opposing force. And that's why he had called it a declaration of war. If it was anything else, they would have been easily able to sneak in, just as the ones who had murdered his beloved daughter and her maid. Rather, that would have been more orthodox. Just as was often requested of by kings and aristocrats, the most powerful ability a magus could hope for in combat was to be able to kill their opponent without laying a hand on them. If one was to ignore that fundamental rule and act with such a grandiose opening move, one couldn't think of it as anything less than a declaration of war. He had always thought that they would come for Iselma eventually. He had heard the rumors of the Galliasta family, and was well aware he had earned their displeasure. While they were a family who had only just left the Middle East and begun their rise to fame, that was all the more reason to expect a kind of fervent savagery from them. Just as with many a family within the clock tower itself, if there was a reward to be gained, they would have no qualms with using force to get it. But, for them to attack with this timing, after mulling over the problem for a while, Lord Byron exited his workshop. 2 magi were standing immediately outside the door.
Mayor Islo.
Yes. Yes?
The pharmacist responded, showing his clear nerves, while the seamster answered with a demure nod.
Please accompany Stella.
In response to Islo's question, Byron shook his head.
That's not really your strong suit anyway, is it?
Without another word, Byron walked off with as much speed as his cane could afford him. As he did, he caught the attention of another servant.
What is Lady Inurai doing?
Ward Valueletta is within her personal room. She has given instructions that she does not require dinner tonight.
I see.
He gave a small nod to the servant. For a bizarre occurrence like this, there was no way a woman like her hadn't taken notice. In other words, she had as good as declared neutrality. That even if Iselma were to fall into some sort of quarrel, the head family of Valueletta had no intention of intervening.
If Lady Inurai doesn't wish to be involved, then so be it.
There was one thing that concerned him, however, like a thorn that had pricked his finger. One possibility sent waves of unease through his soul. At first he had thought the death of the Princess of Gold and her maid to be the work of an enemy faction. Just like their main family Valueletta, Iselma was a family associated with the democratic faction of the Clock Tower. Any sort of sabotage from the aristocratic faction led by El-Melloi, or even by the fence-sitting neutralist faction, would be par for the course. Within the political struggle of the Clock Tower, human life held value less than even refuse. But now, a far more terrifying possibility was sprouting in his head. Fear, Cantat, Lord Valueletta herself is colluding with that family? He wanted to deny it, but at the same time, a deep, cold part of himself refused to let that possibility go. It was far from unprecedented. If it was for the sake of advancing their own magecraft, pillaging the resources and manpower of one's own branch families was an everyday occurrence. Stories of bloodlines who resisted such blatant thievery being completely extinguished were common. Though aligning oneself with one of the political factions of the Clock Tower added the benefit of their protection, it also added this equally unpalatable demerit. But then again, maybe the one who killed the princess was... Another terrible possibility raised its head in Byron's mind. There was no way for him to deny it. Even if they were in a place of good standing with each other, that was far from a relationship of trust. After all, the person he was talking about was someone who had given up everything for the sake of magecraft, who would no doubt tear their own flesh and blood to pieces were it to become an obstacle. Who could become a magus without such an attitude?
Ah.
He nodded, his voice like that of old machinery creaking.
If it's Lady Inurai, then she would even welcome the company of an upstart. That's what democracy means in the Clock Tower, after all. If one has the passion, they should be accepted. If one is a magus, they should accept the change.
While walking down the hallway, it was difficult to keep the disgust from mixing into his voice. Certainly, Iselma was aligned with that democratic faction, who believed that those with the ability should rise regardless of their bloodline. But it wasn't like they had embraced that philosophy wholeheartedly. A magus's instinct was always to reach towards the past, and that meant a strongly developed bloodline was crucial. Beauty itself is amazing, even if it exists for only a moment. The fact that it existed at all gives it value. There's nothing for us to do but run as hard as we can through that one moment graced to us. In the same way, those of the present should pursue their work with no regard for past bloodlines. That is our belief. Inurai had said as much during the social assembly. And that was exactly right. The eternal ideal of the faculty of creation, value, was right here. But an ideal was just an illusion that could not be touched. Those of us who lived in reality needed to maintain a firm grip on it.
And what if bringing in new blood was just a means of expelling the old? How would that young man, the lord of the faculty of modern magecraft, Norwich, answer that question? Byron ground his teeth. The brief flash of white light illuminated the cane-holding gentleman, and for a moment something else was revealed.
In that case, this Byron Valueletta Iselma will see to things himself.
The shadow briefly cast behind him could be described as nothing less than a demon lurking on the wall. Flat Escardos, the name of a young man born in the Mediterranean who had gathered the hopes and expectations of all sorts of people. While the Escardos family itself was one with a long history, it had no particularly grand achievements to speak of. They had spent generations refining their magecraft and building up their magic circuits, but they had produced nothing beyond what could be described as mediocre, that was, until the birth of Flat, whose outstanding talent could be considered nothing less than an anomaly. An excellent number of magic circuits, guided by an overwhelming talent. Lauded as a prodigy, he was quickly sent off to the Clock Tower, but even that venerable institution couldn't match up to his potential. Beginning in the sub-faculty of necromancy, he had been entrusted to Rock Belphegor, the head of the faculty of summoning. However, in only a few months, he had already transferred to a new faculty. With each faculty being unable to keep up with his talent, he rapidly moved between them, much to the vexation of his lecturers. His constant resubmission of his paperwork got to the point where he was on the verge of being expelled. The reason was simple. No matter how much his talent as a magus exceeded the ideal, no other attribute he had lent well toward the life of a magus. His attitude was just too loose, he was often told. In reality, what really forged the magus of the modern day was not a supernatural power or transcendent conscience, but a tenacity built and reinforced over generations. Clinging to a shadowed, intense ideology for hundreds, or in some cases even thousands of years, developed its own sort of extreme power. Even if science were to exceed magecraft in all other respects, as long as that ideal survived, magecraft itself would be ineradicable. But, in that respect, the boy was hopeless. Really, it may have been due to his enormous talent rather than in spite of it. While the reason wasn't clear to those around him, it was at least obvious that the young man known as Flat Escardos lacked that key trait of persistence. Eternally lax, he would always invest himself in the business of others around him, yet as if he was a sponge he fully absorbed all the information presented in his classes, maintaining an almost perfect grade. In the worst cases he would even interrupt his lecturers with a bright smile, adding his own tweaks and changes to improve the lecturer's own formula in the blink of an eye. For a lecturer, there was no greater humiliation, like a flawless diamond set before them that needed not even a single cut. His talent was so extreme there was nothing they could do to develop his skill further, and as such he earned a wordless disdain from those around him. While the clock tower, which existed ostensibly to develop the talents of new magi, could ill afford to let such a talent go to waste, any instructor which tried to work with him found themselves driven away. This situation persisted for about a year. As a result, after being passed between different faculties and factions, as if bitterly letting go of a prized treasure, he was finally entrusted to the El-Melloi classroom. The classroom, which had already taken on a number of problem children of the clock tower, accepted him without reservation. Their ability to offer him guidance that led to easily recognizable growth drew all sorts of attention. In exchange, the pain it caused to the stomach of a certain Lord El-Melloi was similarly devastating. But that was another story. At any rate, now, Flat was pursuing the magical energy of the attackers. In the forest, having detected their magical energy from out on the hill, he had run off through the grass and into the forest after them. Despite the poorly maintained path, he traveled at a speed that would be difficult to match for a professional marathon runner. Of course, that was mostly thanks to his own strengthening. As he ran, he peered up at the dark clouds in the sky between the gaps in the foliage.
How? That's amazing! Since the side effects of weather manipulation are pretty intense, you can basically never see it at the clock tower. This person is being pretty inefficient about it, though. They've got 31, 32 people working together on this, but number 7 and number 20 should probably be switched out. I should really let them know.
With an honest brightness, he spoke those absurd words. Just by listening to that, one might think he had nothing but good intentions. But it was those good intentions that had destroyed many clock tower lecturers. At this point, if one were to classify it as some new breed of curse, it was unlikely the claim would face much challenge. This time, however, the chastising voice that answered him was born of a different purpose.
Flat.
Whoa! You found me already!
Spinning around, Flat's eyes went wide. Standing on a branch above him was the curly-haired young man. Leaning against the trunk of the tree, he held a finger to the tip of nose as he looked down at his classmate with a dirty look, Sven Glushit. Having joined barely a month before Flat, he was the most senior student currently active in the El-Melloi classroom. That being said, Lord El-Melloi II's policy was to let go of his students after they had surpassed the basics anyways, graduating them out one after another as if he was sick of looking after them.
What do you mean, already? There's no way I'd ever mistake your fluffy, frivolously yellow scent. Now come on, let's get back to the professor.
Oh, come on.
Flat complained, as if he was a child being told it was time to leave the toy store.
You'd rather I brought you back by force, then?
Whoa, hold on. Think about this, Lucien. The professor's in trouble right now, right?
And you're just adding to the problem.
Not at all. The professor's going to be happy about this.
What?
Sven frowned.
The Iselma family took Trim, right? So if we go beat up the guys attacking his Alma, they might give Trim back out of gratitude. And the professor will rain thanks on us, too. It's a perfect plan, don't you think, Lucien?
Rather than being perfect, it was the sort of plan that deserved to be struck down immediately. It was like after seeing a trap hole before them, they were politely throwing a bunch of poisoned blades into it before jumping in. But...
First of all, stop calling me that.
For a time, he was quiet. It was the kind of silence that would drive the Lord El-Melloi II straight to massaging his stomach were he around to witness it. Because rather than the quiet of things calming down, it was more like the calm before an awful storm.
They were the people that tried to hurt my G. Tried to hurt Gray.
He muttered. At long last, scratching his head and licking his lips, he continued.
All right, I'm in.
In the middle of the forest, a number of shadows ran through the thick undergrowth. Pushing through the waist-high growth with their own bodies, they rushed on towards the twin towers of Iselma. With their unwavering course, and with their entire lack of regard for the uncertain footing and dense ivy growth threatening to trip them up, had it been a few generations earlier, they might have been described as a march of demons. One of the figures raised their head. In the open space before them stood a well-dressed man with a cane.
Most impressive, making the elements themselves your ally. While this area is particularly susceptible to changing weather, I've never been faced with someone capable of such a brilliant display.
At once, the gentleman assessed the levels of the invaders. For modern magi, how difficult was that magecraft? Or perhaps, regardless of difficulty, how possible was it? In a battle between magi, the most critical skill was the ability to see through to the nature of the opponent's favored formulas, faithfulness to the basics. Following an unwavering history, Lord Byron walked a path that was tried and true.
If you understand that much, how about just giving us what we want?
One of the intruders said with a playful lilt, as if their objective was explicitly clear from the start. But the gentleman before them responded with a fearless smile.
If you think Iselma is defenseless, I'm afraid you are quite mistaken.
Byron stuck his cane into the ground. As he did so, a flurry of globes appeared around him. The clearing rapidly filled with a cloud of bubbles, reflecting the mottled light of the setting sun peering through the leaves in a breathtaking display. Its true nature was, of course, nothing so benign. Heedless of the air currents in the forest, the bubbles filled with Byron's magical energy moved unnaturally to surround the intruding magi. As the soapy surfaces spun, the bubbles reflected the image of the invaders.
Without a word, the intruders watched the bubbles. None of them were foolish enough to carelessly break the bubbles before them. That was, of course, the very lowest level of prudence required of a magus. But that meant those countless bubbles were able to spread out unchallenged, rapidly surrounding the intruders and cutting off their means of escape.
What do you think of the rainbow spheres of Iselma?
Was that the name of the spell that Byron had just whispered?
No monster or any such thing appeared from within them. At least, not that could be seen. Nevertheless, a number of the invaders fell to the ground, clawing at their throats.
The
enraged attackers unleashed a volley of bolts of lightning. As expected, the bubbles that still floated around Lord Byron himself moved to intercept the attack, but they were unable to entirely protect him. As about a third of the attacks pierced through the bubbles, the bolts struck true, driving Byron to his knees.
Ha! The collector, who confined himself to his wilderness retreat, falls after all.
The attackers that had previously collapsed began to recover, and soon they began a new spell with their enraged companions. Clutching a hand to the burn wound on his shoulder, Byron struck his cane into the ground again. The number of bubbles in the air doubled, forming into a rainbow fortress before the invaders. Considering that he was a member of the Faculty of Creation, value. That meant this battle was a question of whether Lord Byron's art could sufficiently oppose the intruders. But
Whoa! The fight's already started!
a hysteric voice echoed from the depths of the forest. In response, Lord Byron's collection of bubbles spun behind him, descending into the undergrowth in the opposite direction from the invaders as they autonomously responded to the new threat.
The primary function of the bubbles was to destroy the oxygen latent in the air, thus robbing his opponents of the ability to breathe. So to see someone completely unaffected by that kind of attack was the ultimate surprise for Lord Byron.
What?
One of Iselma's dogs.
Siege at once tensed up at the new arrival, but the expression of the youth that emerged from the undergrowth was anything but hostile.
You're Lord Byron, right? From House Is
The fact he was somehow managing to keep the shock from showing on his face spoke volumes of Lord Byron's disposition.
And you are?
Flat Escardos from the El-Melloi classroom, reporting for duty.
With a sharp salute,
The blonde-haired boy turned to the invaders. Folding his arms with a triumphant smirk, he called upwards into the trees.
Now, take 'em out, Lashian.
I told you not to call me that.
With an angry yell, Svin dropped to the ground, muttering under his breath about having his cover blown. He lightly stroked his nose.
You guys all smell like sharp metal, you know. Nothing but an ugly, disgusting thirst for blood coming from the lot of you.
Up until that point, the attackers had been looking down on the two boys. It went without saying that anyone who would jump into this situation had to be recognized as a certain sort of dangerous. It was even more crucial for Magi not to write off their opponents based on outward appearances as well. And that was why, even as they laughed at them, they wasted no time in activating their magecraft. But before they could finish, Svin howled. The shockwave of that roar was enough to blow away the attacker's magecraft. In many Asian countries, it was said that the voice of a dog had the power to expel evil. As if the boy's voice had similar properties, the magical energy that should have been flowing through their magic circuits vanished entirely.
No way, you.
El-Melloi classroom Svin Glashite.
Declaring his name before the wide-eyed intruders, Svin's howl changed to another form.
Pallida Moors, Pale Death.
Was that the boy's spell? With a soft hum, Svin's hair began to move. As if the hair itself had been transformed into a different creature, it began to squirm. As they watched, that hair grew, stretching down to cover his back, while his canines grew into blade-like fangs. Though the beauty remained unchanged, its nature had shifted. He jumped. Even so, the attackers responded as appropriate. At once they released the magecraft they had been holding back, though the lightning they released was no more than a one-count spell. Thanks to the enhancing effects of the weather manipulation, it should have had no issue tearing apart their unlucky opponent. But instead, the hand one of them had extended forward, vanished. In the same way as his teeth had become fangs, Svin's fingernails had likewise become razor-like claws. Perhaps even unaware of that change, the magus was relieved of his hand and collapsed to the ground unconscious due to the sudden mass blood loss. Without pausing, Svin leapt into the trees. From trunk to branch, to trunk again, he soared around the forest as if gravity itself was no obstacle for him. One of the magi managed to bring his wits to bear in time to try and give answer to the attack, but upon seeing Svin's form he gasped. Eyes wide. Svin's body had transformed. Close enough to be mistaken for that legendary phantasmal species, the muscles of his body rippled and the hair of his body stood with the firmness of metal, giving the impression of a werewolf. No, his actual self couldn't have changed. Looking closely, one could see that his clothes and shoes remained undamaged by the transformation. The bizarre magical energy that wrapped itself around the young man's body was simply attempting to give off the impression of a werewolf. Rather than werewolf, perhaps the term phantasmal wolf was more appropriate. Bestial magecraft. Across many lands, magecraft was a pursuit that sought to replicate the abilities of animals in people. No, it wasn't just magecraft. The number of Chinese martial arts, like Xing Yiquan and White Crane boxing, that took hints for their movements from those of animals, was too high to count. In the West, motifs of swans and lions frequently appeared in dance and art as well. Since the time when mankind split itself off from the animal kingdom, it had revered it as a source of mystery. Such was the nature of Svin Glashite's magecraft. Just as the term berserker originally referred to warriors who clad themselves in bear skins, his art was to draw forth a tremendous bestial nature from within himself. Infusing his body with the mystery of beasts, he acquired an overwhelming level of speed and strength that far exceeded simple strengthening magecraft. Even if his opponent was a magus, his was a speed that could not be tracked. As if they were no more than straw, he struck through the magi. The fact they were in the middle of the forest no doubt also contributed to Svin's supremacy over the other magi. With the failing light of dusk cut further by the surrounding trees, even if they strengthened their eyesight there, was no way they could track his speed. But every time they made even the slightest contact with Svin's raging claws, flesh came away with them. The remaining magi shifted strategies. Breaking from their tight-knit formation, they scattered themselves around the clearing as they activated another spell. If they couldn't match him at close range, then they would dispatch him from a distance. Being able to rapidly shift into a different fighting style, it was clear that they were all magi experienced in battle. But they didn't have any experience dealing with this ability.
Right, Right, now spin it like this.
Flat said, waving his hand in a circle. For an observer well versed in sports, one might have observed that Flat's posture just prior to waving his hands matched that of the other magi. In psychological terms, this mirroring was the act of adopting another's posture and mannerisms in order to set them at ease. In this case, however, the action had a completely different purpose.
Intervention Stark, play ball!
With that, the vector of the magical energy changed. Just as the lightning left the hands of the magi, it immediately turned, changing directions completely.
Screams filled the air as the magi were struck down by their own lightning, using a doll that resembled the target in order to place a curse on them. Flat's movements earlier had been for the purpose of replicating an effect similar to that well-known kind of sympathetic magecraft. It was a curse one could see from time to time in various schools of Southeast Asian magecrafts. In the clock tower, where European magecraft served as the foundation for all study, such a curse would never be taught. But the same thing went for Flat. His style of magecraft was also unique. Owing to his incredibly rare affinity of void, the spells he would use were all but guaranteed to be bordering on heretical. Within the study of modern magecraft, the idea of collecting the strong points of various styles and combining them into a single art was categorized as chaos magecraft, but after Lord El-Melloi II had evaluated it as something that sounds more like strange magecraft, Flat himself began spreading that name, proud of having his magecraft specially christened by his teacher. Normally, such a formula wouldn't work at all. Chaos magecraft itself was brittle from the foundation up. Since one could only include variations of magecraft they were personally familiar with, though the idea of taking the strengths of other styles of magecraft and combining them into one made it sound almost omnipotent, the reality was that properly codifying those strengths into workable spells was a difficult endeavor. And yet, Flat's approach of "I just did it that way and it worked" was certainly very maverick of him. Above all, his ability to interfere with the magecraft of others was unreasonably potent. With a moan, one of the attackers spoke. The twin jewels of the El-Melloi classroom. In short, the figureheads of the newly rising powers of the clock tower, both having long and storied bloodlines. Neither could be called part of the New Ages, but for that reason they were able to demonstrate true ability without restraint. A marriage of the might of old magecraft to the flexibility of new instruction. Whether they realized it or not, the two moved in perfect sync.
All right, Li Shan, let's pick up the pace. Let's show them what it means to be the aces of El-Melloi.
Stop trying to give me orders.
Despite the face of the words coming through his muddled voice, Svin dutifully struck the invaders after Flat's interference nullified their magecraft. Though they were both of exceptionally strong egos, and the ability for anyone to smoothly cooperate with such vastly different schools of magecraft was unlikely to surpass mediocre at best, the two of them nevertheless executed their teamwork like twins that had trained together since birth. At the same time, both of them came to a stop. Not just them, even the attacking magi had stopped, turning away from the El-Melloi students. The fear written on their face was one of a completely different breed than that of earlier.
But Jadji is going on here.
As he spoke, Atrem Gulliasta's lips curled into a sinister smile.
My master and I leaned up against a tree with rainies to avoid the rain. In order to maintain control over the strongest Lelians, the land controlled by magi often avoided dense urban areas.
As a result, areas like this with dense greenery were rather common. As if that ley line had conferred its blessing on the trees and shrubs growing in the area, despite the obvious age of the trees, they were each thickly crowned with young, vibrant leaves. How long had they looked out upon this scenery?
There was no indication that the thunder was anywhere close to ending. Thick storm clouds covered the entirety of Iselma's territory, as if the clouds were attempting to chase out the setting sun. It reminded me of the story of Orion, who after being killed by a scorpion, became a constellation eternally fleeing from it. As my master stared at the heavy rain, I ventured a question.
Is it okay to let Flat and Sven run off like that?
Yes. Either way, those two would try to force themselves into the fight. Even if their opponents are magi of any reasonable caliber, those two won't let themselves be outdone. As much as they are problem children, they frankly still have that level of ability.
As if in a bad mood, he spoke reluctantly with a puff of cigar smoke. The fact that they had ability sufficient to be considered problem children was likely an honest confession from him, compared to the other faculties. The El-Melloi classroom was already a collection of misfits and dissidents, but even among them those two stood out. For their ability in magecraft, of course, but more so it was their entire way of being. While dedicating such tremendous efforts to learning magecraft, they still stood out as having a nature that was somehow different from the other magi of the clock tower. Perhaps one could say that they were like my master, in his way of being both entirely magus-like and the furthest thing from it.
Well, except for the fact their opponent is not normal.
Not normal?
As my master said that, I felt a shiver run up my back. Though I felt it was somewhat pathetic, at the same time it was a difficult response to suppress.
Atram Galiasta. The man Sven investigated for me. Well, if worse comes to worse, it's not like he's an opponent those two couldn't escape from.
Galiasta. It was a pretty rare-sounding name. Of course, when it came to the clock tower, I wouldn't have recognized any names. But even so, it had a very foreign sound to me. A dry sound. Air hot enough to burn the skin, swords with a thick crescent blade, that kind of feeling. As if to confirm my thoughts, my master continued.
It's an old bloodline from the Middle East, only recently aligned with the clock tower. Their magecraft steps right into the field of curses, so they are a rather troublesome opponent to deal with. At any rate, they use that magecraft to force cooperation from nearby organizations, securing the rights to oil drilling operations. As far as influence in mundane affairs is concerned, they're in the lead even among members of the clock tower, and in an auction for a certain talisman, they struggled right to the end against Iselma.
Oh, that's the talisman you said Iselma had bought up earlier, correct?
At Rainer's interruption, I recalled a certain man.
Actually, there's a certain talisman I'd like to get my hands on.
Mick Greygeely, the man who had just casually announced that he was a spy. Speaking of him, I hadn't seen him since this morning. I had to wonder what he was up to, now that Iselma was under attack. If his confession to being a spy was actually true, then maybe he and Galiasta were. I swallowed nervously.
So, does that mean Galiasta was behind the princess murder?
I wonder.
My master responded vaguely. Putting a finger to his mouth, he narrowed his eyes as he began to put the information in order.
The idea that it was revenge for taking the talisman out from under them is possible, but if that were the case, wouldn't they have opted for kidnapping instead? On top of that, would there be any need to follow up with an attack like this?
What if, for example, they sent someone to find the talisman covertly, but the princess discovered the plot and had to be killed to cover it up?
My master shook his head at Rainer's conjecture.
And after killing her, they just politely returned her to her bedroom? Sure, they could have used some sort of magecraft to keep the scene clean of blood, but how would they have dealt with the mystic lock?
Well...
Scratching at the air with a finger, Rainer's went quiet. Unfortunately, I was completely out of my league in this kind of discussion. I couldn't grasp the thoughts and feelings of even the two in front of me, let alone someone I had only met 2 or 3 times. There was no way I could provide anything close to a useful hypothesis. As a result, I simply watched the two talk, hands clasped, together.
Tee-hee-hee! What's wrong? What's wrong? Why don't you try adding your thoughts to the mix? If it's a mystery game, you might as well throw out a couple dumb theories. Heck, why not 10? As the Watson of this outfit, who cares if you're completely wrong?
I'm not that smart, so...
That's just 'cause you always put off thinking, though, right? I can't. So much easier to repeat that than do any real thinking, right?
I had no response to Ad's sharp accusations. Rather, I agreed with him. Frankly speaking, thinking like that was more trouble than it was worth. If I could just close my eyes and cover my ears, life would be so easy. I didn't even have the courage to kill myself. Rather, I was absolutely terrified out of my mind that if I died, I'd become one of those. If I could just rest peacefully in the ground, that would be fine. But the idea of wandering the earth unable to die...
Hopelessly cowardly, hopelessly lazy. That was me. Even if you said I should try and change, that first step was just too much for me. Ever since I put my old home behind me, I hadn't changed a bit. Why? It was painful. I felt nauseous, like I might collapse.
This incident was pressing close to my heart. Something about the situation here pressured me in a way so different than when we were at the Castle of Separation, but here I was, the only one unable to see anything.
But if we follow that theory, you can't explain the death of the maid.
But if we suppose there are two culprits,
The conversation between Rhines and my master felt so far away, while I felt caught up in the pain in my chest. Probably because it was so close to me. Something so important I couldn't afford to let it go, yet something that struck so close to home I couldn't bear to focus my attention on it. It felt like there were invisible needles mixed in with the incessant rain. Being stabbed would of course hurt, but it was scary to even think that you couldn't see them no matter how much you stared. You wouldn't have any way of knowing until the blood first showed. You wouldn't know they were needles at all until you were dead on the ground, filled with countless needles. And if you looked at that corpse after the rain had stopped, no doubt you would look on perplexed, wondering why they hadn't just run away.
But by your logic, then the Princess of Gold's creation.
No, while the prince's beauty was certainly something manufactured, at that level, whether it was natural or not is irrelevant, the concept of artificial is one that returns to nature anyways. Whether it's polished by running water or polished by a person's hand, a rock is still a rock. In short,
It said Oh, I see. Suddenly, the words being exchanged outside by conscious thought leaked through. The Princess of Gold and the Princess of Silver. Really, I was very much the same as those two. My master's lecture about cosmetic magecraft and its history had struck through me like those invisible needles. Gently I touched my hood. These were my invisible needles, an ice that encased my heart, refusing to melt no matter how much time passed. If talking about needles of glass, then it obviously couldn't refer to anything else. The fact I hadn't realized it until now just went to show how stupid I really was. No matter how far away I ran, my own foolishness still pierced my chest, stabbed my heart, poured out my blood. I'd just be better off dead. I'd rather that imaginary blood just filled my throat and drowned me, let my neck get scratched out, let my face turn all purple. I didn't care how pathetic I looked when I collapsed. Rather, that seemed like it would be the most appropriate way for me to die. I wanted to avoid the disgrace of having my remains turn into a ghost, but if that could be avoided, then...
Gray.
I suddenly realized someone was calling my name. Master?
What's wrong? You've gone pale.
My master's brow was wrinkled as usual as he looked down at me. Though he might have misconstrued my expression as me feeling unwell, the fact that he could tell something was wrong just from that expression was a sign of how long we had spent together. Actually, For a few seconds I hesitated. Though I was beginning to get flustered, I still remembered my thoughts from just earlier, quite clearly. In that case, there was a way much clearer than words I could use to describe my feelings. Just a little, I pulled back my hood. Seeing that, my master's eyes went wide.
Gray! I thought I told you not to.
No. Just like I had asked him to so long ago, he immediately began to reprimand me, but I was able to wave it off. Though I had only pulled back my hood a tiny bit, and though the fingers that had done so felt like they were burning for it, at last I managed to get my mouth to work. My face. I think it could be related to what's going on. Maybe...
To this incident? But...
My master cut off, glancing quickly to his side. He was probably trying to bring my attention to the fact Rhaenys was still here. What I wanted to talk about wasn't something that should be known to just anyone. As if she had guessed as much herself, Rhaenys tilted her head to the side a bit as she spoke up.
Well, if I'm the problem, I can excuse myself.
No, it's okay. I think this is something you need to know as well. Briefly, I looked over at my master. Though his expression was just as conflicted as before, he didn't seem like he was going to voice any objections. Softly, I put a hand to my now revealed cheek.
This is not my original face.
What?
Ryan's expression immediately twisted in surprise. Now thinking about it, Ryan had pointed out my hood a number of times. You'd be so much cuter without that hood, you know. Though she had been teasing me, those words had stuck with me. If she had taken interest in me, then I could only say I was sorry. Really, truly sorry. But I wasn't someone who met the expectations of others. In the end, I just couldn't. You already know about Ad, right?
Hey, come on! Don't take me out so suddenly. I need the time to brace myself.
Releasing the hook under my cloak, I let the cage drop into view. The moment he appeared, Ad's eyes and mouth immediately set about working busily. Thinking about it, back in my hometown, the only ones I could look to help me relax were the people on the TV and this box. this box has a noble phantasm hidden within it. I decided against sharing its true name, the spear that shines at the end of the world, Romgaminiad. A treasure once wielded by the legendary King Arthur. To the clock tower it had a special significance. That's why my master had given me strict instructions to never say the name out loud, except for when I was using it. But even holding that back, Rhaenys was still listening earnestly. She didn't ask any difficult questions about what its true nature was. In short, she was acting like a true magus. She was used to asking questions, limited to certain topics, limited to a certain scope. For that, I was now especially grateful.
Nodding, I continued. My family. Their goal was to create someone who could wield the contents of this box. In that way, we were the same. Born not just with a purpose, but for a purpose, one that was decided for us. Just as the princesses were born for the sake of creating beauty, so too was I born into someone else's role. Also, that both of us were more successful than anyone else. In order to imitate the person who had originally wielded the contents of this box, so many people were created.
Just as the family of magi who had sought to create the ultimate beauty.
My family had believed that if they could create someone identical to that original wielder, not just in the face, but in every capacity, from bodily proportions, to muscle structure, to the internal organs and blood vessels, if they could faithfully recreate that, then they would have someone who could use that noble phantasm. Of course, it went without saying that a perfect reconstruction was impossible, due to the numerous elements of mystery that the hero of old had possessed but were lost to us in the present age. But if they were able to recreate the physical properties of that hero, then somehow or other that divine glow would follow, or so my ancestors believed. To endure the hundreds, if not thousands of years of countless failures, I couldn't even imagine the madness that had gripped them. What had the family heads of all those generations seen ahead of them, cursed to that fate of compliance that allowed not even the slightest waver? It first went really well about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I don't know why. At the very least, at the time I was born, I was just as much of a failure as all the others. I had an excessive sensitivity to ghosts, something those around my family had considered a blessing. But even with that, I had no reason to doubt that I was my own person. There wasn't even a single shred of evidence to justify it. But 10 years ago, looking at myself in the mirror, my young self's face had drastically changed. Though there were some faint similarities to my original face, little by little I watched as my face changed to that of a complete stranger. I could even hear the sound of my body reforming itself. With a pain completely different from normal growing pains, I could clearly hear my bones and muscles creaking and snapping as they rebuilt themselves into a new shape. Inundated by that crushing agony, I spent a night on my bed, clutching my pillow, for what seemed like forever. Seeing my face had transformed, held a much greater sense of nobility. My family had wrapped me in hugs, openly weeping with joy. I didn't even know what kind of reaction was appropriate. That was also when I became able to properly speak with Ad. Apparently, it was problem of precision. Something about how, once I had become similar enough to the original wielder of the noble phantasm, the false personality dormant within the mystic code was awakened. At any rate, he soon became one of the few people I talked to.
I see.
Rhines gave a gentle nod.
My master already knew this much. You could call it a preamble.
Something we talked about the first day we met in my old home. When I had made that request. Please, keep hating my face. Thinking back on it now, it was really a cruel thing to ask of him. I don't like it, so please don't like it either. Was there anything more selfish? I was just so happy that, unlike my family, someone had responded to seeing my face with fear, but even that was no excuse. But that was a discussion for another time. Pushing down my suicidal self-hatred for now, I got to my point.
There were no mirrors in her room, were there?
When Rhinus and I had investigated her room, we couldn't think of a single reason why such a staple for a woman's bedroom was so conspicuously missing. Of course, at the time I couldn't say anything. For me, the absence of mirrors was a given. I was wondering if maybe her face was something artificial as well? As I said that, I could feel my own cheeks start to burn. Maybe I was completely wrong. It wasn't something that could even be called deduction, just simply spilling out the ideas that came into my head. After all,
What did it matter that there were no mirrors? Even I didn't believe that was something that could help us solve this case, but neither Rhines nor my master laughed at me. So, as I put my hood back on, I tried desperately to explain. I was scared. Though my voice was trembling, I couldn't stop the words from spilling out one after another. This time, the fingers of the hand that had returned my hood felt cold as ice. That face in the mirror, seeing my own face change right in front of me, was so scary. Why? In front of these people, I just honestly confessed. Something I could never say in front of a single person in my hometown came out so easily in front of them. It felt like I had just thrown up a jagged stone, but compared to the fear I had felt at that time, it was barely sensation enough to register. It's not that I hate this face. I continued. Of course, there were still some traces left of my original face. From the start, I had that nature, and my ancestors had strived to produce that in me anyways. In all honesty, after 10 years of wearing this face, I wasn't able to tell where the traces of my old face were, and where the entirely new face began. Perhaps, if nothing had happened at all, I still would have ended up with a face like this. Or maybe, as I grew, I would have developed a face that was entirely different. But looking in mirrors, even now, the idea's scary, like I've been possessed by the ghost of a long-dead hero.
I understand. That's enough.
As he spoke, I felt his fingers touch my cheek. Feeling that, I realized I had been crying. With a troubled face, my master wiped the tears from my face with his handkerchief. After that, he returned his hand to his cigar, as if bored.
Transformed? Certainly, that would be terrifying.
Through my blurry vision and the smoke rising from his cigar, I couldn't make out his face very well. The raindrops struck the earth. Rhines remained silent. Surprisingly, even Ad had nothing to say. Even though I had broached a secret known only to my master and the people of my home, he didn't make fun of me. Was he trying to be nice? As pathetic as it was, he was certainly one of my very few friends.
Still holding his cigar, my master struck his hand against the bark of the tree he was leaning on, his eyes going wide.
Wait, don't tell me.
What is it, dearest brother?
Seeing my master's eyes going wide, Rhines tilted her head in confusion.
Really? Is it really that easy?
Returning his cigar to his mouth, he began to mutter. It seemed as if he hadn't heard his sister's voice at all. As if switching places with me, he sank entirely into his own thoughts.
If that's the case, then the calculations match. In any case, it's a planet, so the 120 degrees is all they needed. But for the other, no. That problem had an answer already. The two of them are complementary in beauty, so they would already have the maximum effect. I see. It's not an issue of comparing them to Perrault or Bagil. The issue is far more superficial.
The Case Files of Lord El-Melloi II, Chad 2.
By Makoto Sanda, cast by Our Tale Studio. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening.
Like he had suddenly fallen into delirium, he continued to mutter to himself. His forehead was once again deeply creased as he dove into his own thoughts. It was an expression that I couldn't say I hated. Though I didn't enjoy seeing others suffer or get unlucky like Rhines did, somewhere deep inside I had taken a liking to that face which appeared so suddenly. What kind of scenery was unfolding in his head? I kind of wanted to see it for myself. I wanted to share that view with him. Though I wasn't anywhere close to being called smart, if I could catch just a glimpse of the world in his head, I felt like that alone could save me. It may not erase my doubts, or correct my flaws, but even so I marveled at it like one looking up at a sky full of stars. Maybe, in the same way that he looked up to a genius.
It was the opposite! Finally, my master spoke again. The sun wasn't representing something else. It was standing for the sun itself. At a scope like this, using the sun itself as the symbol would bring the difficulty way down. No, wait. If that's true, then...
Once again, my master grit his teeth, grinding them with a moan. This time, the voice slipping out was far different than the one from him being lost in thought.
Esteemed brother, it's fine if you want to just jump to conclusions like that, but can you pay a bit more attention to the rest of us? What about the sun is backwards?
But my master, putting a single hand to his face, just stared up at the clouds.
Then, that makes the worst possibility possible, doesn't it? Why didn't I realize this sooner? What have I been doing all this time? If I had been any slower, who knows what would have happened?
I felt like I could almost hear his teeth grinding in the back of his mouth. My master finally turned, not to Rhines, but to me.
Gray!
Yes?
Suddenly being called on, I gave a stiff nod. As if worried he had been reading my thoughts, my heart started thundering. Probably, thanks to my hood, he didn't notice that I was blushing. But, paying no mind to any of that, he simply continued to speak.
I have a favor to ask of you.
Just a little, let us rewind time. Just before Flat encountered Lord Byron, a certain Magus nodded within the Tower of the Moon.
I see. So that's a move.
Tuko Azaki muttered softly. On the desk in front of her, a faint steam rose from her cup of tea. It was within the research space specifically allocated to her by the Iselma family. Through the square-cut windows of her room, she could see the dark clouds trying to crowd out the evening sky. Though it wasn't like she didn't know how unstable the weather was in lakefront areas like this, even so the change was far too drastic to be written off as natural. Though she looked down on the happenings outside, what was reflected in her eyes was not the view from the nearby window. A magus servant, depending on the school of magecraft. They were called things like familiars or agathans, or as in the Far East, shikigami. Tuko was of course using a puppet. Having taken an interest in the rumors of a certain magus using wires to create familiars in the Fourth Holy Grail War, she had made a puppet out of springs, gears, and string herself. Though, looking at it now, it didn't seem like something that could be described as having been built on such a flimsy whim. For Tuko, creating a puppet that served only a single function with no other features was simply put, boring. Wings were lined in brass, eyes formed of rubies. That familiar was soaring above the tower twin to the one Tuko now occupied.
Well, it's kind of a pain, but a favor is a favor.
With a small sigh, Tuko stood up. At once, her gaze flicked to her feet, and to the object waiting there. Somewhat rustic and overly large, a bizarre bag she had brought with her. Sat in the corner of the room. Chapter 2. Maio and Islo were holed up in the Tower of the Moon. As Lord Byron had instructed them, they had retreated into their joint workshop to avoid the fighting. In contrast to the primary workshop that sat at the top of the tower, the temporary workshop they now occupied was underground, beyond just the obvious implications in magecraft that placement had of trying to avoid the mixing of magical energy and mana between the two groups. It also served as an accurate metaphor of their compatibility. Of course, just as it was in the clock tower, being underground was an advantage when it came to drawing out magical energy, but with the way Iselma's magecraft relied on the movements of celestial bodies, there were greater advantages elsewhere. The two sat a fair distance away from each other. The stone-walled workshop contained not only the standard fare one might expect, like stills and philosopher's eggs, but also pharmacist tools like mortars and pestles, along with craftsman's tools like spindles and a loom.
Of course, these were for the sake of Maio and Islo. There could also be said to be a historical record of the magi that had been brought in to aid in the construction of the princesses of gold and silver, the ultimate beauty which had been revealed last night, of which only fragments now remained.
What are we supposed to do?
Islo spoke almost unconsciously. His intricately braided hair began to sway. As far as he was concerned, there was nothing interesting to see in people or in society. In actuality, even the magecraft he had suffered tremendously to obtain was something he didn't feel strongly about. All he wanted was to see something beautiful. No doubt he wasn't alone in his family in that regard. As for generations, they had aided Iselma in their craft. As far as Islo was concerned, the only ones worthy enough to wear his dresses were those two princesses. No, even he could feel that his attempts to draw out the beauty of those two in his weaving had made a striking improvement in his own skills. Far beyond just a growing skill as a fashion designer, it also included his growing ability as a magus to prepare clothes that functioned as a kind of mystic code in their own right. Mystic codes belonging to the princesses of gold and silver. They weren't what you would normally expect from a mystic code, a simple object meant to expend magical energy in the process of actualizing a supernatural phenomenon. They were simply tools used to draw out ever more of the beauty from within those two, the essence of which Rhaenys had strangely managed to notice. In seeing something beautiful,
one becomes more beautiful themselves. Just as the Iselma family had spent generations modifying the princesses of gold and silver both magically and physically, so too had the Sabuna family been advancing in their craft. Islo Sabunan was the man who stood at the end, as the result of those efforts. In comparison, the pharmacist Mayo held a somewhat different inspiration.
With a decidedly unhealthy pallor to his face, Mayo was pinching the area around his mouth. Struggling to get by his incessant stammer, he forced his throat to spit out his inner feelings.
I mean, the Princess of Gold?
Islo's eyes narrowed, covering the gloom in his own eyes. He spoke hoarsely.
You and Deidre played a lot together, didn't you?
Mayo's face immediately darkened. That was true. From the time she had just been a young candidate for becoming the Princess of Gold, from the time Estella was just a young candidate for becoming the Princess of Silver, he had been as a playmate to them. Though it was somewhat rare for magi of differing families to spend so much time together when young, in this case there was the practical necessity of needing to learn about the nature of their bodies as soon as possible. After all, the doctor needed to know far more about the patient's body than even the patient themselves. Mayo's family, the Kleinels family, had long served as pharmacists for the Iselma family, and since then, a high amount of contact between their families had become critical. From Mayo's perspective, the purpose of his skills had been to support those two even since before they had been born.
Why do you say that? All of the sudden?
Kalina and her sister were also often around, weren't they?
The ones who knew the games were Tithos too, after all.
Originally from a Celtic background, the twin maids knew all sorts of unique games. Not only Deidre and Estella, but even Mayo was often brought along to participate.
Deidre really loved hopscotch. Says she was so much better at it than I was.
I liked that too.
Huh? You almost never joined in though, right?
Estella and Regina sighed. Whenever I tried to play with Deidre, you always got angry, didn't you?
Mayo gulped, at a loss for words. There was no use trying to deceive an old friend. No matter how much they were magi, their likes and dislikes were no different than those of ordinary people, especially at such a young age. His small feelings, his small jealousies, he remembered all of them. And together with them he grew up, simply adding the nature of a magus on top of what was already there. He was unable to continue from there, even though it felt like the overflowing feelings might gush up out of his throat of their own accord. He couldn't form them into words, just like it had always been.
I don't dislike you.
Ah.
Islo nodded, his face decidedly pale. As if to allow time for their words to settle, he waited a short while before speaking again.
Mayo, do you think those attackers are the ones who killed the princess?
I don't know.
Mayo weakly shook his head. To be honest, he didn't really want to think about anything.
All he wanted to do was curl up on the floor and sleep like mud. How much happier would he be, eyes closed to the world? While it was said that among magi there were those who were capable of using self-hypnosis to perform field stripping, a mental deconstruction and cleaning to completely erase their own stress. What Maya wished for was a far more complete form of self-destruction, completely dismantling the psyche to the point each minute piece became meaningless and then never putting them back together. No, from the start it would just be better if he had never been born. Then, he wouldn't have to have experienced the loss of someone so close to him. How much time passed? The door opened. Mayo and Islo held their breath. Though it was someone they both knew well, she seemed somehow even more beautiful, that personification of heaven and her maid.
Estella? Regina?
Though she was supposed to be the Princess of Silver, he had been close friends with since they were young. The face she wore now was unfamiliar to him. No, even that face was the result of their own work. Just as they had with the late Princess of Gold, they had offered up everything to give birth to the greatest beauty in her.
So, you two are in here? I'm glad.
Even her voice rang out with a beauty greater than that of any musical instrument. Would one call returning to the small vestiges of a younger self cruel, in order to create that perfect, isolated beauty? Everything else was stripped away from her, just as with the Princess of Gold, rather than El-Melloi later Iselma. Princess of Silver seemed like a much more appropriate name now.
What do you need, Estella?
Even so, Mayo stubbornly continued to call her that, the princess. As her maid began to speak, the princess stopped her. She then opened her mouth to speak herself.
Could I ask for your help?
Mayo and Islo both shared a silent look. Before they could reply, though, she continued.
I believe Lord Valuetta is the one who killed my sister.
A choked sound erupted from Mayo's throat, matched by perfect silence from Islo. But in the end, the pharmacist spoke first.
Why?
Iselma is originally a branch family of Valuetta. If we were to grow too successful, that would certainly be disadvantageous to the head family.
If the subordinate becomes too successful, the boss is in danger. It was a truth that was accepted all over the world.
If the Princess of Gold's request for asylum had been successful, then of course Lord Byron would have lost standing. But management of the branch families inevitably fell to Lord Valuetta. That was why she presumed the old woman was the true culprit. It was a rational hypothesis, considering the techniques employed by Valuetta. Slicing the Princess of Gold apart inside her own room would be child's play, and if Kalina had found some sort of clue, it wasn't that unreasonable to expect her to kill the witness and frame that independent action-type mystic code for the crime.
And so, after sitting stiffly for a while, Mayo raised his head. Gathering what one might call his resolve, he asked,
What's the plan?
The sun had finally lost in its battle against the pursuing storm clouds. In a forest that was already quite dark at the best of times, a heavy rain fell on a darkness that was impenetrable to all but the enhanced eyes of a magus. Within that darkness, a dark-skinned young man surveyed the field of battle. Heedless of the rain pouring down on him, he gave an exasperated sigh.
You were supposed to have reached Iselma's twin towers by now, but it seems there have been some unforeseen developments.
My apologies.
The hooded attackers knelt before the newly arrived man. Paying no mind to their apologies, the man himself advanced slowly.
But Tramgaliasta, that's my name. It looks like you've taken on some interesting kids here, Lord Byron, though I must admit they seem somewhat lacking in character.
As if making that introduction itself was some sort of disgrace, his face twisted in a melancholic scowl as he spoke. No doubt he had intended to make his introduction before the towers themselves.
They are students of one of my guests, after all.
Byron spoke while shaking his head, as if he hadn't quite fully accepted the fact that reinforcements had come.
You don't say. I'm quite envious. To be so popular that even people you don't know have come running to your rescue. As expected, the veterans of Europe are on a whole different level. Where I come from, it was common for even disagreements among family members to be settled with bloodshed, you know.
Uttram sighed. Putting on a face of feigned heartache, he continued.
So how about it then? My friends here should have asked you earlier, but would you consider surrendering that talisman to us?
Even if you ask, you have to know how I will answer.
As expected, there was no way Lord Byron would bend. After all, if he had intended on surrendering, there would have been no need for him to intercept the attackers out here in the forest. He could have just waited calmly in his tower and handed over the talisman once they arrived. As the tension mounted between the two of them, the younger man was the first to change it into something else. Stepping forward on the sodden ground, he spread his arms wide.
Then war it is. War. Ah, what a savage sound. That, the most lamentable truth.
Atram shook his head, as if overcome by regret at the situation. Even so, he didn't even attempt to hide the vulgar smile splayed across his face. A smile that confessed that, no matter what he said, that savagery was one of his greatest pleasures in life. Almost any magus was prepared to risk their life in such a battle. Even if the battlefield was a poor medium for the exercise of their specific magecraft, the honing of instinct, the drawing forth of the will to fight, the situation that forced the individual to push themselves to the limit of their own life and strength, were fertile ground for the development of magecraft. But even so, the number of magi who truly enjoyed fighting was unexpectedly small. At most, it was simply a means to an end. Of course, there was generally no need to risk the mysteries discovered and magic crests forged by their ancestors in such an all-or-nothing gambit. Atram Galliasta fell in neither camp, though. A beautifully simple process. Overwhelming victory itself was what he sought.
The technical that, but if that is your will, then there is no avoiding it. Inexperienced as primero am, primero esta shall endeavor to be your opponent.
Hold on.
A voice called out from another direction. Atram's eyes snapped to the side, where Sven was now speaking.
Lord Byron, I have a request to make.
A request?
If we repel these intruders, I would like you to return our professors, Lady Rhinus Volum and Hydrogarum.
I see. Lord Byron became quiet. Unable to answer immediately, Atram immediately jumped into the gap.
Could you stay out of this, please? At best, you are just costing us valuable time. I'm not interested in playing out all your petty problems here.
Reaching a hand into his suit, he withdrew a small pot-shaped object.
Primeval batteries. Is that a term you are familiar with?
The oldest batteries in the world were discovered in the outskirts of the Middle East. Rather than being used as storage space of electricity, it was thought they were developed in an attempt to create tools used in the process of gilding, but the method of creating them remained unchanged among magi, passed down for an entirely different purpose than the ones concocted by the scientific community. And when one such family of magi had fallen to ruin, the Galliasta family had put its incredible wealth into motion to secure its history for themselves. Having already been involved in mineral and compensation-type magecraft, these primeval batteries were a perfect fit. In the end, they were able to lace the electricity they held with their own magical energy, and so they gained control of a power considered to be entirely within the realms of the gods in any number of ancient lands. Utilizing that power, they accrued tremendous prosperity. And of course, in having access to that power, spells that manipulated the weather came only a few steps later.
Rage gush out.
With those words, the electricity became an enormous hand. The speed with which it attacked was on par with that of lightning. Powering through the resistance in the air as if it was nothing, in the blink of an eye it struck out at the boy. In answer, the phantasmal wolf roared. Both were techniques overflowing with magical energy. Lightning and sound, though the medium was different, the motive force belied both mysteries remained unchanged. In short, the greater mystery would no doubt overwhelm its opponent. As the lightning and the howl made contact, they threw off invisible sparks that deflected the rain around them, whirling together into a mess of magical energy that rapidly broke down. It appeared to be a tie, though in terms of power, Atram's lightning was certainly the stronger of the two. Once the rain and wind washed away the ensuing cloud of dust, the phantasmal wolf Sven had still stood defiant.
That's rather impressive. As far as magecraft goes, it's only second rate, but in an actual combat situation, it's doubtless a high-grade skill.
Second rate, huh? That's rich, coming from a kid like you.
Unflinching at the bloodthirst dripping from Atram's voice, the phantasmal wolf continued.
You understand that yourself, don't you? My professor could see through a technique like that in a flash. Your magecraft is definitely polished. As a tool used to hurt people, for use in combat, it's more than perfect. But that's not what magecraft is for. Rather than a magus, you're more like a spellcaster.
How deeply must those words have struck home? Atram's eyes were wide, boiling over with rage. Drawing forth many times the amount of magical energy he had used earlier through his magic circuits, he activated his crest while pouring it into the battery. The spell brought by the Galliasta family converted that magical energy into lightning with the utmost efficiency. It was like a dragon. Anyone looking at that scene would surely be able to envision the jaws of that terrible creature opening wide before him.
Brooking no attempts at flight, the lightning-born dragon soared forward to swallow Sven, who disappeared a moment before contact. With a speed no human's eyes could follow, Sven leapt away. Scattering branches and trunks like pinball, the gathered magi cried out in surprise as Sven fell like a shooting star, claws aiming straight for Atram's head.
In the opposite direction of the attackers, the wind and rain sent waves through the grass, reminiscent of the ocean. Among those waves, the narrow path cutting through it seemed like it might be swallowed up. That path, which was walked only by magi, seemed to appear and disappear over and over, as if by magecraft itself. Now in that ephemeral path, a large figure rose. A horse-drawn carriage stood waiting. In front of the open door to the carriage, a burly, servant-looking man held an open umbrella out for an old woman. A moment before boarding that carriage, a stunningly beautiful voice rang out like a bell.
Wait!
The beauty it held seemed enough to rob the word of meaning. Though the scene of the grass battered by the raging storm was nothing of note, the addition of that one woman standing in the middle of it made it look like a masterpiece of art, one that would remain forever etched in the memories of any who gazed upon it. Whether being witness to what one could clearly see was the most beautiful sight they would ever witness in their lives was a good thing or not was left to be decided. The old woman turned at the voice. Lord Valueleta. Her full name, Inurai Valueleta Atrohum.
Oh, if it isn't the Princess of Silver. And how may I help you? Maybe I'm just losing my hearing thanks to my age, but that seemed like an odd way to address me.
I told you to wait.
Giving me commands, huh? While I'm fine with dispensing superficial politeness, I don't remember going out of my way to be so rude before.
You are the one who killed the Princess of Gold, aren't you?
No meandering, no euphemism, just a direct, straight-bladed question. Regina stood watching her intently, as if that was the only way she could support her.
Oh, I see. That's what you think. Interesting. Of course, I must also be one of the suspects. I guess it was pretty suspicious of me to stay present for the inspection of the body, wasn't it? I had intended it as a kindness, but you could also take it as me trying to destroy the evidence, can't you?
You were in on it from the beginning too, weren't you, Mick?
No, not at all.
The man who had declared himself to be a spy to Rains, Mick Gragili, stood boldly by Inarai's side, acting like her personal servant. He should have been a magus associated with the Faculty of Curses, Jigmery.
While I used my outside connections a bit, I certainly didn't do enough to warrant being called an accomplice. I haven't done anything so fancy.
How shameless. And I imagine you called the magi attacking us now as well.
That's not entirely accurate. Galliasta managed to accurately observe that I was present and reached out to us, asking that Valueleta didn't get involved. And while I agreed to that, I certainly didn't ask them to do anything. The only thing Mick did was act as our go-between.
Her smile looked the same as ever, but that only added to the impression of the unspeakable darkness hiding behind it.
Are you saying you came to the social assembly without even knowing that Galliasta was planning on making their move?
Hey, no matter how skilled you think I am, I can't be the mastermind behind every crime out there. Leave that for the conspiracy theorists. Well, I guess the existence of a secret society of magi itself is something for the conspiracy theorists. How rude of me.
Unable to completely hide under the umbrella, the rain striking her shawl made it waver.
Hey, let's say I am the culprit. What would you do about it? You going to ask the clock tower to hold a trial? I'm not sure you can expect that to be exactly fair. The justice system barely works as it is in the rest of the world, so expecting it to accomplish anything in the world of magi is naive at best. And if what that Lord El-Melloi II said is true, then she was already plotting defection. As the head of the Faculty of Creation, Value, I'm well within my right to exact punishment. No matter how hard you try, the best result you can expect is shifting the balance of powers slightly in the clock tower's internal struggling.
In that case, then kill me now. Mick's eyes went wide, while Regina just stood silently. Stroking her temple for a few moments, Inurai spoke again.
I see. So that's your trump card, is it?
Yes, if it's you, you shouldn't have any difficulty killing me at all. But if you do that, the knowledge will spread far and wide. The one who called in Galliasta, the one who took the lives of both the princesses of Iselma, was none other than Lord Valueleta. Your reputation will be as dust.
So saying, she turned to face a hill, a small distance away. Thanks to the strengthened senses of the magi, they could easily make out the two figures standing there.
I'm sure you understand. Mayu and Islo are both watching us. While they are certainly deeply involved with the Iselma family, they are no less members of Maluestia's neutralist faction. Not even you have the power to keep them quiet.
Valueleta was aligned with the democratic faction. In short, those who believed that even the New Agers should be appointed to positions of power, a faction that sought to restructure the clock tower. No matter how much of a big shot one was, separating oneself from that factional dispute was anything but easy. While it was certainly within the realm of possibility for one within the three great families of the clock tower, doing so would be accompanied by its own risks.
So you're putting your own life on the line? Things really can't be easy with you these days, can they, princess? Under different circumstances, I might have even taken a liking to such behavior.
If you don't want that to happen, then why don't you call off these invaders?
Hey, were you listening at all? My only connection to those guys is that they told me not to interfere. Just being a lord or a member of the three great families doesn't carry much weight out here in the woods, you know?
Her voice wasn't especially cold, nor was it particularly indifferent. That was just the way things were. That's what her words seemed to say. Just as with her proclivity to enjoy the fruits of modern science, this old woman was very much a realist. The princess' shoulders began to tremble. Even if it was out of anger, even that reaction was beautiful. If she was the end result of Iselma's efforts to create the ultimate beauty, then of course even her feelings and disposition would reflect that.
Then
Wait!
A shout rang out. From the opposite direction the Princess of Silver had come from, a man in a black suit appeared from within the rain, struggling and out of breath.
If possible, both of you, please wait!
Are you okay? Why don't you have a seat there, brother?
From beside him, a venomously exasperated voice called out. Behind it, face placid while she adjusted her hat, was Rhaenys El-Melloi Arcasort, Lord El-Melloi II. Standing there, heaving deep breaths in the pouring rain with his hands on his knees, was none other than that young lord. If we can look for a moment from the perspective of a magus, let us have a rather common-sense conversation. Aside from a few outliers, when speaking about strengthening of a magus's own body, practically speaking, that means the enhancing of muscle strength and agility, but that doesn't necessarily include an improved stamina. Rather, since physically exerting oneself while performing magecraft exhausts both physical and mental energy, one could say it would more likely have a negative effect. Of course, that all depends on the skills and talent of the caster, and there were plenty enough examples of those who were talented enough in strengthening to be able to perform with little to no impact on their overall stamina. In short, the fact that he was out of breath here at all was as a failing mark for a lord.
Made it. You were planning on fleeing, weren't you, Lord Valuetta?
Hey now, have some respect. Iselma may be a branch family of Valuetta, but that doesn't mean they have our unconditional protection. If Galliasta is coming in with such a flashy show of force, there must be something deeper at play here. It seems the smarter play is to figure everything out once the dust is settled.
Right! That's what I figured you would say. And so the Princess of Silver came to try and stop you. Because if Lord Valuetta leaves the picture, there's no way to stop Galliasta from going on a rampage.
Seeing the princess maintain her silence, he continued.
And so, you accused Lord Valuetta of being the culprit, did you not?
So you heard us?
No. Unfortunately, it was all I could do just to get here in time.
Using strength and perception to locate the carriage in the storm, and then running at a full tilt to reach it before it left was possible for him. But that alone put him at his limit.
To be able to strengthen his hearing in order to eavesdrop on their conversation was beyond his talents anyway, but just listening to his ragged breathing was enough to prove that just getting here took all the strength he had.
I just realized the true nature of this case is all.
Yes, his recognition of what was happening had only occurred moments prior, the thought that the Princess of Silver was the culprit, or rather, that it would be most convenient for the princess if Lord Valuetta was the culprit. This incident wasn't about searching for the culprit of some crime, but rather it was just a single phase of the clock tower's interfaction war.
And I do believe I mentioned I would take on the investigation of this case.
Hey now, are you seriously planning on playing detective even now? Even you have to realize it's a lost cause at this point?
The dark-skinned man looked as if he wasn't even aware he was being drenched by rain. Still holding the umbrella out for inner eye, he scratched roughly at his chin.
If he's going through the trouble of bringing that up now, there must be some significance to it. Isn't that right, Lord?
Yes, Just like the Princess of Silver here, it would be problematic for me if you were to run away.
Say that all you like, but like I already said, there's no reason for me to stick around, is there?
As Inorai replied with a snort, the princess glared at her from beneath her veil. Caught between the two of them, El-Melloi II frowned deeply. Finally, he spoke again.
In that case, let's strike a deal.
A deal?
In short, it would at least be in both Lord Valuleta and the princess's interest if the intruders were stopped, would it not?
Easy to say. But if they're willing to risk their lives by launching an attack on Iselma, they must be pretty determined. With what we have here, there's no guarantee we can stop them. Before that even, I doubt we could even get them to stop and talk.
What Inorai said was beyond obvious. In that distant forest, Atram Galiasta had already declared war. Bringing such an all-out conflict to an end was far more difficult than putting it into motion in the first place. Even if the players involved were magi, fighting against human psychology like that was often a losing battle.
I have an idea.
In response to her unspoken question, Lord El-Melloi II offered his own plan. Not only the old woman herself, but the princess, Mick, and even the maid Regina reacted strongly to the weight of that plan. After a long wait, Inorai finally gave a small nod.
I see, and who exactly is going to pull that off? Certainly not you, Lord El-Melloi II.
I'll take care of it.
Inorai and the princess both spun at those words. One more person was standing there, the true successor of the El-Melloi title, the one who had set up a third-grade lecturer in the seat of Lord, when she herself was only 7 or 8 years old.
If it's for my own brother's plan, then I'll take on the intruders. Of course, I'll be borrowing a bit of strength to do it.
As everyone but El-Melloi II himself shared a look, an entirely different voice called out.
What are you doing?
Pushing through a stammer, Maio shouted at them. Behind him stood Islo, warily watching his back. Though their original purpose had been to stand by and witness should Inorai decide to kill the Princess of Silver, they had descended from their vantage point after seeing the situation change upon the arrival of El-Melloi II. Though he still stood with a weak, timid posture, Maio nevertheless positioned himself to defend his childhood friend, concealing some sort of mystic code within his jacket.
Perfect timing. There's something I'd like to ask of you two as well.
That is a rather unsuitable expression, good brother. I won't go into the details, but my brother here has quite a difficult background. We must stay vigilant on keeping him on the straight and narrow, or who knows how much more twisted he'll get.
Am I the only one who feels some malice in the word more there?
Yes, well, I've just been full of malice from the start. I'm afraid an accusation like that won't stir me in the least.
Beside Islo and Maio, who were now shifting their gazes back and forth between the others present, the next to speak up was Inorai.
By the way, what happened to that one student of yours?
Svin's eyes took in little more than Atram's twisted smile. At the same time, his nose was at work. Triangular, a gaudy yellow. With a single sniff, he understood the character of his opponent's magecraft. Raindrops evaporated mid-air. A net of invisible electricity hung in the air above Tram's head. A trap he must have set earlier, meaning his outrage at being called a spellcaster was a feint attempting to lure him into it. A realization that made Svin shudder. Speaking from the perspective of an ordinary magus, Atram's pure strength was nothing out of the ordinary. That may have been a limit of the primeval batteries themselves, but any of the old guard of the El-Melloi classroom would have been able to polish that spell up some more. However, when it came to real combat ability, which expanded well past the realm of magecraft itself, Atram was considerably superior. In an instant, Svin reached out with the back leg of his illusion, leaping back to a nearby tree, slightly changing his posture in the air. Having avoided the electric net Atram had put in place for him, he cycled his magical energy around to prepare to tear him apart. Even if he was going to use a thin layer of electricity to defend himself, all he had to do was tear through it. And so he had swung down with all his might. But at that moment, a powerful impact hit him from the side, blowing him away entirely. Wrenching himself free of his illusionary body, Sviven had just barely managed to land upright. It wasn't something Atram had done. The proof of that was that the electric net was torn apart yet again, prompting a shocked reaction from the dark-skinned man himself. What was that? Though obscured by the rain and darkness, from the middle of the forest emerged a bright scarlet. As that lone figure approached, everything went immediately quiet.
Hey, now, aren't you guys going a bit overboard the magecraft here?
As if that was some trouble for her, the woman smiled, just as her hair. Sven got the clear image of a vivid scarlet from the woman's scent. For some reason, though, he felt like he should never say that out loud. Though he didn't know it, right now she had taken her glasses off. As if deeply interested in what was happening, she stared at him.
No way.
He knew that name. Atran as well was aware of her existence. Both of them felt a shudder at her appearance. There was no way they could have predicted her intervening in a situation like this.
My apology. El-Melloi II.
Advancing over the soaked ground, she stepped alongside a certain person, beside Atram. Turning to face Sven, Tuko Aozaki, the one heralded as having achieved the highest rank of Grand in the clock tower, smiled gently.
Unfortunate had been asked to become your enemy.
Tuko's foot snapped forward. The first to realize what she was drawing there was Flat.
Lashian!
Behind his back, Flat's hands began to move in the same spell he had used to interfere with the lightning magecraft from earlier. However, before he could complete the spell, Flat was blown away.
아니, Blondie. Trying to take me by surprise is fine, but you're way too obvious about it.
At Tuko's words, Flat dumbfoundedly lifted his face out of the mud.
Confused? Why?
Is there a way I wouldn't know that? You've been going off over and over against Sky Asta's men, haven't you? Obviously you found some method to read the flow of their magical energy. A common enough talent, but your application of it is rather spectacular. No proper result at the clock tower would teach you how to interior and reverse the effects of another spell. You then force a boomerang effect and make them take themselves out.
As if truly admiring what she had seen, Tuko had become quite talkative. She had given special emphasis to that part about a proper lecturer too.
Well, in my case at least, by the time magical energy is running through, the spell is already over.
In a smooth motion, Tuko drew a certain shape with her finger in the air, rune magecraft. Now, the rune carved at her feet was Fehu. To either side of it were written 2 Algi's runes, one to blow away Sven and Atram's magecrafts earlier, and another to attack Flat just now. The characteristic feature of rune magecraft was these symbols. While it took time to engrave them in the first place, once they were done, they could be released as a single action spell, by simply passing magical energy through them. The time lag between activating the spell and its completion was vanishingly small. While that made the effects that could be drawn out of them limited, it left no room for Flat to intervene. Of course, that was hardly the first time Flat had seen a single action spell. At the clock tower, those could be witnessed any number of times. And the rune magecraft itself was something Tuko had sold to the clock tower too, becoming widespread enough that even Flat was capable of using it. The problem was the beauty of her weaving. Beyond obvious things such as with the princesses of gold and silver, the composition of a spell had an element of aesthetic beauty to other magi. In the same way, a programmer might admire another's code, the way she was connected to her magical foundation was just too ideal. It was a dream anyone who had dabbled in magecraft had no doubt entertained at some point. Her raw magical energy was not particularly overwhelming. Neither was she using some sort of terrifying mystic code, as high-ranking members of the clock tower were often wont to do. But the way her magical energy flowed had an air of perfected beauty to it, as if flowing through a Mobius strip. To Flat, who was more sensitive to the magical energy of others than average, the aesthetic quality of it was even more staggering. So this is the ability of one who brought an entire field of magecraft, no, possibly more than one, back from ruin. And by simply witnessing that, Flat's mind was made up in an instant.
Right. We've got no chance against her. Lasheen, let's get out of here.
What? Don't mess.
As Finn turned to look at him, his eyes went wide, the one shouting that wasn't Flat at all. Though it did indeed look just like him, the one speaking stood frozen in posture and expression, like dolls of paper painted black.
Lasheen, let's get out of here. Lasheen, let's get out of here.
Lasheen, let's get out of here. Lasheen, let's get out of here.
Lasheen, let's get out of here. Lasheen, let's get out of here. Lasheen, let's get out of here. Lasheen, let's get out of here. Lasheen, let's get out of here.
The way they constantly repeated that one line was like a broken music box. Shrugging, Tuko spoke.
So the original has already run, huh? He's a quick one. Splitting with just one touch. It looks like he's transcribed his own image onto shadows, then used that to make a copy of himself. What school of magecraft did he learn that from? I wonder. Maybe the German countryside?
Glancing between the shadow puppets, she soon frowned.
No, hold on. This isn't working off of any existing foundations, is it? He's using the spirits out to serve Elsa, an impromptu foundation. That's like inventing a new CPU for every spell he wants to cast. So he's one of those ridiculous things just because he doesn't know they're supposed to be impossible. Well, not that I should talk.
Tuco gave an exasperated sigh. Magecraft was the practice of running magical energy through a foundation to draw out the illusion of a supernatural phenomenon. But, at least theoretically speaking, there was no rule that prevented one from creating that foundation on the fly. However, in this case, the foundation being improvised boasted an excessive range of parameters, from the classic variables of spiritual energy in the earth to the motions of celestial bodies, to things like a single breath of wind, a handful of sand, the thoughts of those present. All of these things needed to be taken into account, needed to be included in the calculations for preparing each individual spell. Because it relied on so many parameters, a spell that functioned perfectly fine at the time of its inception might cease to work entirely the next day or even a few seconds later. Foundations based outside of faith or the collective unconscious had to contend with that instability.
Putting the necessity of it aside, being able to perform spells of that level, at his age is on the level of a brand. That El-Melloi sure has some interesting kids.
With a small smile, Tuco drew a figure in the air with her finger. While it looked similar to the letter S of the Roman alphabet, its true nature was that of the rune that served as its basis, Sowilo. Bearing the meaning of sun, the rune's power rapidly scattered the lingering shadows of Flat's magecraft, like the morning sun melting the night's frost. Even drawing the same rune, differences in the method of writing it and the environment could greatly change the effect and strength of the output. Tuco herself had once used that same rune in a certain park, stealing the attribute of night itself from a particular place. Compared to what she had just done, her present magecraft seemed hopelessly sloppy. Magecraft itself was tenacity. The transforming of oneself into a single cog of that machine was the precondition to practice. As polished as her craft may have been after years at the clock tower, any number of her old friends would no doubt sigh in disappointment at that application of it, if they had been alive. Even so, for now it was sufficient. Keeping the various emotions that drew forth under wraps, Tuco turned to the remaining boy.
So, what will you do?
That's obvious, isn't it?
Saying so, Svin pitched forward, pushing off with the rear legs of his half-substantiated transformation, digging powerfully into the wet dirt, fangs bared, as if thirsting for their opponent's throat.
Ignoring your friend's warning.
If the other option is running away because that guy told me to, I'd rather die.
Svin spoke with fangs still bared, the state of his phantasmal body having no obvious effect on his ability to converse.
Yeah, guess there are idiots like that out there too.
She then turned to the man standing beside her.
Feel free to go on ahead.
Frowning for a moment, a tram hesitated at Tuco's urging.
Is that all right?
I have no reason to call myself your enemy this time.
Before he had time to even breathe after her response, a tram turned back, eyes wide, though they should have all been erased earlier. A single shadow puppet that had perhaps been kept in reserve sang out from a new place nearby.
Miss Tauco, was it? If it's money you want, you'd be better off knocking out that dark-skinned guy and making a puppet of him and then using it to take over his house. It'd be a lot more efficient and make a whole lot more people happy, too.
A tram ground his teeth angrily, while Tuco glanced at him briefly, as if seriously considering the suggestion. In the end, however, she shook her head.
안도순데 돼 있다. 본 포시네때 넌. I doubt I could motivate myself to make a puppet for such a boring reason.
Taking a deep breath to relieve the difficult expression he had been wearing earlier, Atram angrily set to kicking at his collapsed subordinates, hitting them with just enough of an electric shock to forcibly awaken them. He turned to his original prey.
Then, Lord Byron, shall we continue the negotiations?
Negotiations regarding what, may I ask?
The gentleman replied warily, drawing his cane closer. More than the sudden arrivals of Etram and Flat, he was more concerned by Tuco Ozaki, the one whose strength he was far more familiar with. Even with just the ability she had showcased here, There was no way he would act carelessly. With a big smile, Atram leisurely stepped forward.
Wait, who said I'd let you pass?
Eyes burning with fighting spirit, Sven appeared even more intimidating than before. The magical energy feeding his phantasmal form, refined by the boy's powerful magic circuits, set the air of the forest to shivering.
What a reliable knight you have there. Though perhaps he should think more about who exactly he's protecting.
In any case, I'll have to deal with this first.
Sven said, prompted by the startling truth his nose had already revealed. Around him, at a radius of about 10 meters, countless runes had been engraved into the ground. It was absurd to think she had drawn them all, since she had arrived a short time ago, at what should have been the origin point were the runes Nordies, Jera, and Uruz.
No way. The meaning behind that string of runes was most likely creation, which meant Tuko Ozaki's skill in runes was so great, she could use rune magecraft to draw the runes themselves. Feeling his hair stand on end, Sven leapt backwards. Thanks to his bestial magecraft, he had more than a speed to outpace even the activation of a single action spell.
Gah!
Even so, his foot was caught. One of the magi that had collapsed earlier was grabbing onto his leg. On top of the collapsed magus's body was a mana's rune. But that rune whose meaning was mana's, of name was so most certainly being used to manipulate.
Sorry, I don't like getting good tools go to waste. Tastes as bad as I thought.
Despite standing in the rain, at some point she had lit a cigarette which she now held in her mouth. Before she even finished speaking, the countless runes surrounding Svivin exploded, and dozens of impacts blew away both the phantasmal wolf and Sven's consciousness. Desperately, Flat tried to suppress his own voice. While running through the forest, he was nevertheless maintaining a long-distance spell. While it was a feat that reminded one of the divided thought process signature of the Magi of the Atlas Institute, he naturally had no such ability, accomplishing his muted tasking with raw skill. As Tuko had deduced, it was something almost entirely independent from his ability as a magus. But this kind of flashy performance, something that couldn't be replicated by any other Magi of his age or experience, was Flat Escadas's calling card. Perhaps it's a bit of a digression, but one could probably assume that the instruction of Lord El-Melloi II had something to do with his talents being expanded in that direction. While he continued running, he used one of his shadow puppets to speak to the distant Tuko.
Miss Tuka was it? If it's money you want, you'd be better off knocking out that dark-skinned guy, making a puppet of him, and then using it to take over his house. It'd be a lot more efficient and make a whole lot more people happy, too.
Through the puppet, he heard the reply come back. Unfortunately, there's no aesthetic in that. I doubt I could motivate myself to make a puppet for such a boring reason. Of course, both the shadow puppet and Flat said at the same time. If the line was being drawn due to aesthetics, then there was no angle to really approach from. Even Flat himself would be pretty unhappy if told to make a puppet that looked like that guy. But of course, in the current situation, Flat couldn't really just let things stop at that.
What should we do, Lashan?
In response to his uncharacteristic weakness, a strong response came back.
You're not really in a position to be worrying about others, though, are you?
The sound that called out to him was obviously not a normal voice. While voice might have been an accurate description of it, it was obviously not a sound produced by any human vocal cords.
You're not quite out of the woods yet.
It was a cat. Behind Flat, a single cat was pursuing him, but as it looked at him, it became clear it had no eyes, entire body, jet black. It seemed entirely flattened, as if it only existed in 2 dimensions.
With a shout, Flat picked up speed. While his acceleration was aided both by magical strengthening and Flat's own uncanny ability to dodge around the various bushes and shrubs of the forest, the 2-dimensional animal had no issue keeping pace with him.
Wait! Fine, whatever!
With some sort of chant, Flat turned and unleashed his own magecraft at the pursuer. The power, angle, and effect of the spells were numerous. From flames, to storms, to a rain of countless needles, not a single one was like another. Just as Tuko had concluded, perhaps even changing location made some spells unusable, and all of them struck out against the pursuing cat. However, as those spells gouged into the trees and earth of the forest, the cat remained entirely unharmed. The cat didn't laugh, but by making its mouth disappear, it appeared to be smiling.
Not working? Am I just exhausting myself for nothing here?
Feeling a cold sweat break out on his face, Flat continued to push his feet to move faster. But no matter how fast he ran, the gap between them didn't grow, and now it was beginning to shrink.
Come on!
This time, the spell he threw back had more explosive power than anything he had used before. Never mind the cat, even Flat himself was blown backwards by the shock wave, but as the wave threw him back, his body began to accelerate in the air. Without resisting, Flat activated a mystic code to reduce his own body weight. Covering only his face and vitals, he struck the ground unharmed, save for being covered in mud, rolling dozens of meters through the forest before coming to a stop. But, still wearing a playful look, Flat looked back to see he had gained no ground on the pursuing cat at all. Without any response itself, the small animal seemed to reign supreme in the dark forest.
Day, that didn't help either.
Except that besides the cat, there was one response.
Are you okay? A voice called out from the tree in front of him. Seeing the girl step out from the shadow of that tree, Flat's eyes went wide.
Gray!
It was a particularly strange feeling, looking down at the wide-eyed Flat. As my master had said, Flat had run off into the forest in this direction, and so at his instructions I left to follow him. Partway there, I had felt a large movement of magical energy, so it was not difficult to pinpoint his location and meet up with him. However, seeing the always relaxed and happy-go-lucky Flat covered in mud, frazzled, and fleeing full tilt was enough to flip my switch. I looked out at the shadow pursuing him. No, there was no way it was something so mundane. It was just something borrowing the frame of a cat. Even for a mystery, some sort of shape that at least approximated something real was necessary for it to be actualized. No matter if it was born from magecraft, the interference that would have to be dealt with if it took a completely unrelated shape would be considerable, if I was remembering my lectures correctly.
Shee-hee! What even is that? Is that really something made by modern magecraft?
As if he just couldn't hold it in, Ad broke out into laughter. Conveniently, that was just as Ad was needed. Ad.
Releasing the hook, I rolled my right shoulder, releasing him. The cage, with Ad already partially transformed inside of it, dropped from my cloak into open view. The ghostly glow, the will-o-wisp in a cage, immediately took on a new shape. A shape anyone could recognize, a simple farmer's implement. In this case, a form for harvesting souls. The Grim Reaper's scythe. With a kick, I leapt off the ground. Sporting strengthening no ordinary magus could hope to match, my leap sent mud splattering all around as I soared through the cramped forest, the scythe's blade heedless of the tight quarters. The blade clearly slashed through the cat. But the scythe, which could even cut through the spirits of the dead, caused only a light ripple as it passed through the paper-thin cat. Shaking as if to throw off the rain, it reached out to counterattack with its claws. Flipping backwards through the air, the claws took a few strands of my hair with them. As I evaded, ample proof that the cat's speed was on par with my own, or perhaps even higher.
Way and the even faster than me. That fact struck hard. Only half a day earlier, I had crossed blades with that automata. Once again, the humiliation of that altercation was revived in my chest. Though I knew it was silly, coming up short in a contest of blades like that created a strange burning feeling in me.
Help her, we? That's not like you at all.
The numerous eyes decorating the scythe turned to look at me as it spoke. Because my master told me to.
How moving!
As that shrill laugh echoed, I gathered magical energy from the surroundings. In this form, the amount of magical energy that could be accumulated was limited, but this was nevertheless the territory of a magus, especially with the effects of Galeasta's weather control in place. The swirling energy collected within us unchecked. The collected magical energy ran through my magic circuits into my nerves and muscles. There was the threat of every blood vessel in my body exploding if I overdid it, but like someone who had ridden a bike since they were a child, I had no hesitation. In short, I was well used to becoming a cog in the machine of this mystery. Though I may not have been a magus, there was no doubt I was a denizen of that same world. The image was that of a spark. The gathered sparks became a ghostly flame, swirling, spinning, roaring in my chest. Across the world, legends of the spirits of the dead taking on the forms of flame abounded. My master had once proposed a theory as to why that form specifically was so common. Don't you think it's because they've burned themselves out? If you exist by burning your own spiritual body, won't you inevitably burn out too? With a breath, I calmed myself. Having transformed myself into a system for the sake of mystery, I turned to the cat.
I knew how sharp its claws were. Forget iron pipes. They could probably cut through steel plates like they were paper.
Those claws, so thin as to be two-dimensional, could likely cut through any three-dimensional object with ease. If the mystery underlying it was weaker than adze, then it should be sliced cleanly in two by that scythe. This time my body moved unconsciously. Without mind for the cat's incoming claws, the scythe spun. As if its outer edge were a top, it spun in vertically in the space between the trees. 7 times it sliced through the cat. No damage was done. There was no surprise. The cat was unharmed, just as the blade passed through it smoother than it would through water. But if it wanted to repeat the dance, I'd do it a dozen times. If that wasn't enough, then 100. Such a contest held no meaning to me. If it thought to wear down my body and mind, then it was fighting a losing battle. Honestly speaking, that kind of exhaustion was a somewhat pleasant sensation.
Gray, there!
Suddenly, a voice called out. Ad understood before I did.
Gray!
At those words alone, I leapt once more. The direction and distance were managed by Ad, who by now was synchronized with my own body. As I landed with a splash, my scythe raced once more towards the night sky. This time I could feel the impact. Invisible to my eyes, indeed, probably cloaked in some sort of magecraft to make it invisible and unnoticeable. At last it revealed itself as it fell to the ground. It was a familiar, taking the shape of a bird. Its body and wings were made of brass, and its eyes were ruby. Within its body spun something like a reel of film, projecting a soft light through its jeweled eyes. The moment that light stopped, I knew the two-dimensional cat was gone.
Thoughtful. It was just an image.
No wonder it couldn't be cut. Even if you have a scythe that cuts spirits, there's no way you can slice apart a shadow projected onto the air. Or rather, no matter how many times you cut it, as long as the projector still functions, it will be reborn any number of times. It was a mystic code far removed from the modern era, one certainly appropriate to be in the hands of a grand. With that, the strength left my limbs. I could feel my nerves had been pushed to their very limit. The sinews in my arms and legs were screaming under the weight of the magical energy coursing through them.
But Gray, why?
Master told me to come and get you too, and just in case that grand level magus.
The contents of that box are going to be a problem, aren't they?
At the sound of a very real voice, I jumped. Whether I liked it or not, I could clearly recognize its owner. With stiff motions, I turned around to see exactly what I expected. That crimson hair, beautiful even when drenched by the rain. She gave off the faint scent of tobacco. Perhaps because of the rain, we hadn't noticed that smell until just now. Scratching her head as if in frustration, the woman's icy gaze was locked on me. The grand... Ah, now I understood. That was why my master had seemed so conflicted when he gave me those instructions. He wasn't worried at all about the group Galliasta had brought with him. He didn't even have to stop to consider whether Flatten's Zvin would be able to overcome magi of that level. But realizing the one thing he may have overlooked, he had begun to worry. In short, that this magus, that Tuko Aozaki, might choose to enter the fray. Why? Why are you on Galliasta's side?
What are you going to make me lay everything out? You're here because that lord sent you, right? I would have thought he would have at least explained this much.
Before her fearless demeanor, I remembered a story my master had told me. In the clock tower, those with special abilities were granted color titles. Those who bore the 3 primary colors were recognized clearly as the greatest of their generation. As such, it was clear to anyone that Tuko Aozaki would be crowned with the title of pure blue. But she wasn't. Rather than the primary color of blue, she was given a composite of red. Because she's not the strongest. For some reason, I felt like that was incorrect. I didn't know a single magus approaching her level. Perhaps it was because she had shunned the factional warfare within the clock tower, but that didn't seem to be the case either. Was it because, like her hair, her soul itself burned a bright red? a color whose beauty derived from the fact it could never reach purity. A faint gulp. As I faced off against her, I spoke again. My master, he told me that you might stand in our way. A phrase bearing a subtle nuance, not Goltasta's allies, but this obstacle right here.
Ah, I see. Well, I was commissioned specifically to become your enemy.
Hearing that, engraving that answer in my chest, I continued. And Sven?
Oh, 노을보, 이보라 some good memories. So I left him as he was, cancelled the same for the 가렸다 해. But that's not really in the realm of my responsibility.
I bit my lip. I didn't feel the least bit of camaraderie. Even if I was part of the El-Melloi classroom, I wasn't even a magus. On top of that, even without considering the tap from earlier, this woman was an opponent of terrifying proportions. Even standing facing her had my fingers trembling and my heart beating hard. Even so, I never felt the urge to back down, because whenever that situation would arise, the face of that one person who never ran from anything would fill my mind. I squeezed my fingers tight around the scythe in my hand.
That thing is quite interesting. It's the first time I've seen it, but it's got a history of more than 1,000 years, doesn't it? I bet it's not even something meant for human hands, is it? It certainly isn't something any modern magus could handle.
A mystery bows to a greater mystery. Of course, there were certainly situations where compatibility and execution could turn the tide, but that was the foundational law, and in many cases the strength of a mystery was tied to its age. Tuco perceived, however dimly, the noble phantasm at the core of this scythe.
So, will you please retreat?
Sorry, but that's all Bisa job. Sorry, but our job is a kind of step out of the way on this one.